Hi everyone, welcome to Red Umbrella. I hope you're all doing well. Today I want to argue that Family Guy, the adult animated sitcom debuting in 1999, enjoyed a period many fans regard as its golden age, before subsequent seasons showed decline in comedic sharpness and cultural impact. By examining its early appeal, revival success, peak fan reception years, shifts in humor and character focus, and how later seasons compare to the classic era, we can understand why fans and critics pinpoint a particular period as the show's peak, and what changed. But before we begin, I'd just like to kindly ask you all to subscribe. It's completely free, and it really helps us improve the videos for this wonderful community we've managed to build. Anyway, that's enough. Let's begin. Origins and early appeal. When Family Guy premiered on January 31st, 1999, following Super Bowl 33, it introduced audiences to something that felt fresh and daring in the landscape of animated television. The show came from Seth MacFarlane, a young animator who had pitched the concept to Fox based on his thesis film at the Rhode Island School of Design. The premiere episode, Death Has a Shadow, introduced the Griffin family: Peter, the bumbling father; Lois, the patient wife; Meg, the unpopular daughter; Chris, the slow-witted son; Stewie, the diabolical baby; and Brian, the talking dog. This family would become iconic in animation history, but in 1999, they were newcomers, trying to find their place in a television landscape still dominated by The Simpsons. The early episodes of Family Guy, spanning what would become seasons 1 through 3, established a comedic voice that differentiated the show from its predecessors and competitors. Where The Simpsons focused on satirizing American family life through grounded stories, and where King of the Hill offered sincere, character-driven comedy, Family Guy embraced absurdist humor and boundary-pushing jokes that many critics initially found shocking or offensive. The show was unafraid to tackle controversial topics, make jokes about sensitive subjects, and generally push against the boundaries of what network television would allow in animated comedy. One of the most distinctive features that Family Guy introduced in these early seasons was the cutaway gag, a storytelling device that would become the show's signature element. These cutaways interrupt the main narrative to show flashbacks, fantasies, or tangential jokes that often have nothing to do with the plot. An early example appears in Death Has a Shadow, when Peter compares a situation to something else, and the show literally cuts away to show that comparison visually. This technique allowed Family Guy to pack more jokes into each episode than traditional narrative structure would permit, creating a joke per minute ratio that appealed to audiences looking for constant comedic stimulation. The cutaway gags in the early seasons often felt fresh and unexpected because the format was new and the writers were still exploring what they could do with it. A cutaway might take viewers to ancient Rome, to a 1970s sitcom, to a war zone, or to any other setting the writers could imagine. The randomness of these gags created a sense of unpredictability, where viewers never quite knew what would happen next. This unpredictability became part of the show's appeal, creating anticipation as audiences wondered what absurd tangent the show would take them on. Beyond the cutaway gags, the early seasons established character dynamics that fans found compelling and memorable. Peter Griffin emerged as a well-meaning but incompetent father whose childish behavior and poor decision-making drove many of the show's storylines. Lois served as the voice of reason, trying to manage her chaotic family, though the show also revealed her own flaws and rebellious past. Meg became the family punching bag, a running joke that would intensify in later seasons. Chris was established as sweet but dim. Stewie's character as an evil genius baby plotting world domination provided a unique comedic element. Brian the dog served as Peter's best friend and the show's intellectual voice, often commenting on the absurdity around him. The relationship between Peter and Brian became central to many early episodes. Their friendship dynamic, with the educated dog serving as straight man to Peter's buffoonery, created opportunities for both physical comedy and verbal wit. Episodes like Brian, Portrait of a Dog from season 1 explored Brian's character depth, showing him attending obedient school and grappling with his identity as both a dog and an intellectual. This blend of absurdist premise with genuine character exploration gave early Family Guy a balance between silly and substantive. The early episodes also introduced recurring characters and locations that would become staples of the series. The Drunken Clam, the bar where Peter and his friends gather, was established as a regular setting. Quahog, the fictional Rhode Island town where the show takes place, was developed with its own geography and community of recurring characters. Glenn Quagmire, the sex-obsessed neighbor, was introduced with his signature catchphrase. Joe Swanson, the paraplegic police officer, joined the main cast as one of Peter's friends. Cleveland Brown, the calm and mild-mannered neighbor, completed the friend group. These supporting characters enriched the show's world and provided additional additional comedic opportunities. Season 1, which consisted of only 7 episodes due to the mid-season start, introduced the core elements but was still finding its voice. The animation quality was noticeably rougher than later seasons, with simpler character designs and less fluid movement. The voice acting, while recognizable, had not yet settled into the exact performances that would define the characters long term. The writing showed promise but was still developing the show's distinctive rhythm and style. These early episodes feel somewhat different when viewed today compared to what Family Guy would become, representing a formative period where the show was establishing its identity. Season 2, which aired from September 1999 to August 2000, showed significant growth in the show's confidence and execution. With a full season order, the writers had more opportunity to develop storylines and experiment with different types of episodes. Da Boom, the Season 2 premiere, featured the family surviving Y2K and the apocalypse, demonstrating the show's willingness to embrace high-concept premises. Peterbus Unum showed Peter declaring his property an independent nation, playing with political satire. Let's Go to the Hop tackled drug use through an absurdist storyline about toad licking. These episodes showed the range of comedy the show could attempt. The writing in Season 2 demonstrated sharper timing and more confident joke construction than Season 1. The cutaway gags felt more integrated into the episode's rhythms rather than feeling like interruptions. The character voices became more distinct and recognizable. The show developed running gags that would recur across multiple episodes, creating callbacks and references that rewarded regular viewers. This development of internal continuity, even within a largely episodic structure, helped build audience investment in the show's world. Season 3, airing from 2001 to 2002, continued developing the show's voice and expanding its ambitions. Episodes like Stuck Together, Torn Apart explored Peter and Lois's relationship with more emotional depth than earlier seasons had attempted. A Fish Out of Water took the family to Lois's wealthy family, playing with class dynamics and Peter's insecurity. From Method to Madness featured Stewie bonding with his alcoholic babysitter, showing that even absurd characters could have touching moments. The season demonstrated that Family Guy could balance its crude humor with occasional emotional resonance. However, Season 3 would end with cancellation. Despite building a dedicated fanbase and generating significant cultural buzz, Family Guy's ratings were inconsistent, and the network decided to end the show. Family Guy Viewer Mail number 1, the season finale, aired in May 2002 and appeared to be the final episode of the series. The cancellation seemed to confirm critics who had dismissed the show as a Simpsons ripoff or as crude shock comedy without substance. For fans who had connected with the show's humor and characters, the cancellation was disappointing. The critical reception during these early seasons was decidedly mixed. Many professional television critics found Family Guy derivative, offensive, or lacking the heart and social commentary of The Simpsons. Reviews often focused on what the show was not rather than what it was trying to be. However, audience reception told a different story. Young adult viewers, particularly males aged 18 to 34, responded enthusiastically to the show's irreverent humor and willingness to offend. College students quoted the show, shared favorite moments, and debated which episodes were funniest. Online fan communities began forming around Family Guy during these early seasons, creating spaces where fans could discuss episodes, share quotes, and connect with others who appreciated the show's specific brand of humor. These early online communities on message boards and forums helped sustain interest in the show even after cancellation. Fans traded episodes, created fan art, and kept the show's cultural presence alive during the cancellation period. The appeal of early Family Guy for its core audience stemmed from several factors. The show felt transgressive in ways that appealed to viewers who enjoyed comedy that pushed boundaries. The rapid-fire joke style meant that even if some jokes did not land, another would come along quickly. The pop culture references and cutaway gags created a viewing experience that rewarded pop culture knowledge and quick thinking. The characters, while often crude or mean-spirited, had distinctive voices and relationships that viewers found entertaining. Looking back, many fans who discovered Family Guy during these original 3 seasons remember them as the show's most vital period. The episodes from this era are frequently cited in discussions of favorite Family Guy moments. Quotes and scenes from these seasons became part of internet culture and were shared widely even before YouTube made such sharing easy. The show felt dangerous and unpredictable in ways that later seasons, with established formulas and expectations, would not quite recapture. The animation style in these early seasons has a distinctive look that differs from later Family Guy. The colors are slightly less saturated, the character models are less refined, and the overall aesthetic feels rawer and less polished. This rougher visual style actually contributes to the early season's appeal for some fans, who feel it matches the show's more rough-edged humor. The animation would become noticeably more polished and computer-assisted in later seasons, creating a cleaner but potentially less distinctive visual style. The voice acting in the early seasons also has qualities that distinguish it from later Family Guy. Seth MacFarlane voices Peter, Brian, Stewie, and Quagmire, and his performances in the early seasons sound slightly different than they would become. Peter's voice had not yet deepened to the exact tone that would become standard. Stewie's accent and vocal patterns were still being refined. Brian sounded slightly less jaded. These subtle differences contribute to the early seasons having a distinct feel compared to the show's later incarnation. The music and sound design in early Family Guy also contributed to its identity. The theme song, composed by Walter Murphy, established an upbeat, jazzy tone. The incidental music often referenced cinematic scores or popular songs, creating additional layers of humor through musical choices. The sound effects were sometimes exaggerated for comic effect, creating a heightened cartoon reality. These audio elements combined with the visual humor to create the show's overall sensory experience. The early seasons also benefit from what might be called creative hunger. The writers and creators were working to establish the show and prove its worth, leading to a sense of energy and ambition that comes through in the episodes. There was a feeling that the show had something to prove, that it needed to justify its existence and win over audiences. This creative urgency can produce some of the best work from television shows before they become comfortable and established. The themes and subject matter in these early seasons, while often controversial, reflected genuine satirical intent in many cases. Episodes commented on American culture, family dynamics, television itself, and various social issues. While the show was rarely subtle in its approach, there was an attempt to use comedy to point out absurdities and hypocrisies in society. This satirical edge gave the show a sense of purpose beyond just making audiences laugh, even when the satire was broad or obvious. The legacy of these first 3 seasons extends beyond just being the beginning of a long-running series. They established a template that many other animated comedies would borrow from or react against. The rapid-fire joke style, the willingness to be offensive, the cutaway gag structure, and the focus on absurdist humor over emotional storytelling all became elements that other shows would either adopt or deliberately reject. Family Guy's influence on adult animation in the 2000s and beyond is undeniable, and that influence stems largely from what these early seasons established. For fans who lived through the original run and cancellation of Family Guy, these seasons represent a specific moment in television history. They remember when the show was new and surprising, when each episode felt like it might be the last, when the show's survival was uncertain. This context of precariousness and novelty colors how these seasons are remembered and contributes to their status as a potential golden age in retrospect. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. This early success and devoted fan base would set the stage for something unprecedented in television history, as Family Guy would return from cancellation in a way few shows ever have. Section 2. The First Revival, Seasons 4 to 5. The story of Family Guy's revival represents one of the most remarkable turnarounds in television history, demonstrating the power of syndication, DVD sales, and passionate fan bases in the early 2000s media landscape. After the show's cancellation in 2002, something unexpected began happening. Cartoon Network's Adult Swim programming block started airing Family Guy reruns in 2003, introducing the show to new audiences and giving existing fans the opportunity to revisit episodes. The ratings for these reruns were exceptional, outperforming much of Adult Swim's original programming, and demonstrating that there was significant audience appetite for Family Guy. Simultaneously, the Family Guy DVD releases were selling in numbers that shocked the entertainment industry. The Season 1 DVD, released in April 2003, sold remarkably well, despite containing only 7 episodes. The Season 2 DVD followed with even stronger sales. Season 3's DVD release continued the trend. These sales figures sent a clear message to Fox that there was money to be made from Family Guy, even if the show was no longer producing new episodes. The combination of strong syndication ratings and impressive DVD sales created a business case for reviving the show that was difficult for network executives to ignore. In 2004, Fox announced that Family Guy would return with new episodes, making it one of the few canceled shows to be revived based on fan demand and post-cancellation success. The revival represented a validation of the fans who had kept the show alive through their viewership and purchases. It also represented a new model for how canceled shows could potentially find second lives if they built strong enough fan bases and performed well in ancillary markets. The announcement generated significant media coverage and excitement among fans who had mourned the show's cancellation. Season 4 premiered on May 1st, 2005, with the episode North by North Quahog, which directly acknowledged the show's cancellation and return. The episode featured jokes about the hiatus, with characters commenting on how things felt different, or how time had passed. This meta-awareness of the show's own history became a characteristic of the revival period, with Family Guy frequently making jokes about its cancellation, revival, and the television industry more broadly. The premiere drew strong ratings, validating Fox's decision to bring the show back. The creative energy in Season 4 felt renewed and enthusiastic. The writers seemed eager to prove that the revival was justified and that Family Guy still had fresh comedy to offer. Episodes from this season are frequently cited in best-of lists and remain fan favorites decades later. PTV, which aired in November 2005, became one of the most talked-about episodes of the season for its satire of FCC censorship. The episode featured elaborate musical numbers parodying television standards and practices, demonstrating the show's ability to tackle media criticism through comedy. Pretoria, an episode where Peter declares his property an independent nation, showed the show's continued willingness to play with high-concept, absurdist premises. The episode combined political satire with the show's characteristic crude humor, creating a balance that appealed to the core fanbase. The Cleveland Loretta Quagmire introduced a dramatic development in the supporting characters' lives, showing that Family Guy could still create storylines with consequences and continuity, even within its largely episodic structure. Season 4 also introduced Blue Harvest, the first of what would become multiple Star Wars parody specials. While Blue Harvest would technically air as part of Season 6, the groundwork for these ambitious parody episodes was being laid during the Season 4 revival period. The willingness to devote entire episodes to extended parodies of beloved franchises showed Family Guy's growing confidence and ambition. These specials would become events that drew viewers who might not regularly watch the show. The animation quality in Season 4 showed noticeable improvement over the pre-cancellation seasons. The years between cancellation and revival had seen advances in digital animation techniques, and Family Guy took advantage of these developments. The character models were more refined, the movements were more fluid, and the overall visual polish was enhanced. Some fans would later argue that this increased polish came at the cost of some of the early season's charm, but the improved animation allowed for more complex visual gags and set pieces. Season 5, airing from 2006 to 2007, continued the revival's momentum with another full season of episodes. Stewie Loves Lois explored the complicated relationship between Stewie and his mother, showing character depth beneath the show's crude exterior. Saving Private Brian sent Brian to Iraq in a war satire that was controversial and topical. Mother Tucker featured Peter's mother dating Tom Tucker, mixing family dynamics with the show's established cast of Quahog residents. The season demonstrated range across different types of storylines and comedy. One of Season 5's most significant episodes was Road to Rupert, which initiated what would become the Road to series of episodes featuring Stewie and Brian on adventures together. These episodes would become a beloved subset of Family Guy's output, typically featuring the two most articulate characters in elaborate situations with higher production values than standard episodes. Road to Rupert showed that the pairing of Stewie and Brian could carry entire episodes, and that their dynamic provided opportunities for different types of comedy than the family-focused episodes. The ratings during Seasons 4 and 5 were strong, often outperforming Fox's expectations and competing well within the Sunday night animation block. Family Guy's return contributed to Fox's Sunday night dominance alongside The Simpsons and what would become American Dad. The success of the revival also led to the creation of The Cleveland Show, a Family Guy spin-off that would premiere in 2009. The Family Guy universe was expanding, demonstrating the franchise's commercial value to Fox. The cultural impact of Family Guy during this revival period was significant. The show became a reference point in popular culture, with characters, quotes, and scenarios entering the broader cultural conversation. The phrase, "Oh my God, who the hell cares?" from Season 4 became a meme. The Bird is the Word song from Season 5's I Dream of Jesus became an internet phenomenon. Stewie's various quotes and Brian's pretentious intellectualism became shorthand in online discourse. Family Guy was not just a successful show, but a cultural force, generating content that spread beyond its viewership. The DVD sales continued to be strong during this period, with Season 4 and Season 5 both selling well upon release. The show also benefited from the growing influence of YouTube and online video sharing, which allowed memorable clips to spread virally. While this unauthorized sharing cut into potential revenue, it also expanded the show's cultural reach and introduced new viewers to episodes they might not have seen. The show's cutaway structure made it particularly suited to clip culture, as individual gags could be shared as standalone content. Fan communities continued to grow during the revival period, with online forums, fan sites, and eventually social media pages dedicated to discussing episodes, sharing favorite moments, and debating aspects of the show. These communities helped maintain enthusiasm between episodes and created spaces where fans could engage with Family Guy beyond just passive viewing. The sense of community among fans contributed to the show's cultural presence and helped sustain interest across the gaps between seasons. The voice acting during Seasons 4 and 5 showed the performers fully comfortable in their roles. Seth MacFarlane's performances as Peter, Brian, Stewie, and Quagmire had reached their definitive versions. The supporting voice cast, including Alex Borstein as Lois, Seth Green as Chris, Mila Kunis as Meg after replacing Lacey Chabert, and the various recurring performers, all delivered confident performances. The chemistry among the cast was evident in the natural-sounding dialogue and comic timing. The writing staff during this period included several writers who had become significant in television comedy. Many writers who worked on Family Guy during the revival would go on to create their own successful shows or work on other major comedies. The writer's room during this period was generating ideas at a rapid pace, trying to feed the show's need for constant jokes and cutaway gags. The creative environment was reportedly energetic and competitive, with writers trying to top each other's joke pitches. The show's willingness to court controversy continued during the revival, with episodes tackling subjects that generated complaints from advocacy groups, parental organizations, and media watchdogs. However, this controversy often translated into publicity and viewer curiosity. Episodes that generated outrage often saw rating spikes as viewers tuned in to see what the fuss was about. Family Guy seemed to understand that being talked about, even negatively, was preferable to being ignored in a crowded television landscape. Season 5 also showed the development of more ambitious episode structures and longer-form storytelling within individual episodes. While Family Guy remained primarily episodic, certain episodes in Season 5 experimented with more complex narratives or extended set pieces that went beyond the standard cutaway gag structure. This experimentation suggested that the show was not content to simply repeat the formula that had worked previously, but wanted to continue evolving and trying new approaches. The relationship between Family Guy and The Simpsons during this period was complex. The Simpsons had famously referenced Family Guy in a 2002 episode that suggested Family Guy was a crude imitation, though this was before the Family Guy cancellation. After the revival, Family Guy occasionally made jokes at The Simpsons' expense, creating a perceived rivalry that media coverage emphasized. While the rivalry was likely more playful than genuinely antagonistic, it created narrative tension that interested viewers and media outlets. The success of Seasons 4 and 5 established that Family Guy was not just back, but was thriving. The revival had succeeded beyond what even optimistic predictions had suggested. The show was drawing strong ratings, selling merchandise, generating cultural moments, and establishing itself as a cornerstone of Fox's animation lineup. The financial success also gave the show more stability and assurance of renewal, reducing the precariousness that had characterized the original run. Looking back, many fans and critics consider Seasons 4 and 5 to be part of Family Guy's peak period. The episodes from these seasons are well remembered, frequently rewatched, and often cited as examples of the show at its best. The combination of renewed creative energy from the cancellation and revival, the writers' eagerness to prove the show's worth, and the lack of creative fatigue that might come from hundreds of episodes resulted in a run that many viewers found consistently funny and entertaining. The episode Petarded, which featured Peter taking an IQ test and being declared intellectually disabled, showed the show could still generate controversy while making points about how society treats people with disabilities. The Fat Guy Strangler brought back Lois's brother Patrick and created a storyline with real stakes and suspense. Brian the Bachelor parodied reality television, showing the show's continued engagement with pop culture. Each episode seemed to bring something distinct while maintaining the overall Family Guy sensibility. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. This period is often anchored as part of the Golden Age, before quality perceptions would shift, as the show entered what many fans consider its peak creative period. Section 3. Peak Fan Reception, Seasons 5 to 7. When fans discuss Family Guy's best years, Seasons 5 through 7 consistently appear at the top of ranking lists, representing what many consider the absolute peak of the show's creative output and cultural relevance. This period, spanning from 2006 to 2009, captured Family Guy at its most confident, its most ambitious, and its most culturally influential. The combination of post-revival creative energy, established character dynamics, improved production values, and a writing staff that had found the perfect balance between absurdist humor and occasional emotional depth created a run of episodes that fans continue to revisit and celebrate years later. Season 5, which began airing in September 2006, built directly on the momentum of Season 4's successful revival. The season opener, Stewie Loves Lois, featured Stewie becoming genuinely attached to his mother after a near-death experience, showing that the show could explore character relationships in ways that felt meaningful even within its absurdist framework. The episode balanced genuine emotion with the show's characteristic humor, creating a template that several future episodes would follow. This ability to occasionally deliver emotional moments without abandoning the show's comedic identity became one of the hallmarks of this peak period. Mother Tucker from Season 5 featured Peter's mother dating the news anchor Tom Tucker, creating family drama that Peter had to navigate. The episode showed the show's ability to use its established cast of Quahog residents in different configurations and storylines. The supporting characters who had been introduced in earlier seasons were now fully developed enough to carry significant portions of episodes, enriching the show's world and providing fresh comedic opportunities beyond just the Griffin family dynamics. The Season 5 episode, Barely Legal, became controversial and memorable for featuring Meg developing an obsessive crush on Brian after he takes her to prom. The episode pushed boundaries in terms of age-inappropriate content and created uncomfortable comedy from Meg's pursuit of the family dog. While controversial, the episode demonstrated the show's willingness to explore taboo subjects through its absurdist lens. The episode generated discussion and became one of the more talked about installments of the season. Road to Rupert initiated the Road to series that would become a fan-favorite subset of Family Guy episodes. These episodes typically featured Stewie and Brian traveling together, often involving elaborate adventure scenarios with higher animation budgets and more cinematic storytelling than standard episodes. The Road to episodes allowed the show to experiment with different animation styles, musical numbers, and extended storylines that went beyond the typical cutaway-heavy structure. Road to Rupert set the template with Stewie and Brian traveling to Aspen to retrieve Stewie's teddy bear. Season 5's The Courtship of Stewie's Father focused on Peter and Stewie bonding, giving the show an opportunity to explore the relationship between these two characters who typically had minimal interaction. The episode showed that even character pairings that the show had not emphasized could generate interesting storylines and comedy. This flexibility in character usage and willingness to try different relationship dynamics kept the show feeling fresh rather than repetitive. Whistle While Your Wife Works featured Peter getting Lois hired at the brewery, creating workplace comedy and marital conflict. The episode demonstrated how the show could take familiar sitcom premises and execute them with Family Guy's particular sensibility. The balance between recognizable family sitcom structures and the show's absurdist humor created comedy that felt both grounded and unpredictable. Season 6, airing from 2007 to 2008, continued the creative peak with episodes that remain highly regarded by fans. Blue Harvest, the season premiere, was Family Guy's first full-length Star Wars parody, retelling the original 1977 film with Family Guy characters in the Star Wars roles. The special showed incredible attention to detail in recreating scenes, shots, and dialogue from the original film while adding Family Guy's comedic sensibility. The special was ambitious in scope, required significant production resources, and demonstrated that Family Guy could execute high-concept episodes that felt like events rather than just regular installments. The success of Blue Harvest led to it being released on DVD as a standalone product, further demonstrating the show's commercial viability and cultural reach. The special attracted viewers who might not regularly watch Family Guy, but were interested in the Star Wars parody concept. This ability to draw in casual viewers alongside the core fanbase expanded the show's audience and cultural footprint during this period. Movin' Out, Brian's song, from Season 6, featured Brian moving out after Peter accidentally kills his mother. The episode dealt with grief and family bonds while maintaining the show's comedic approach. The episode's title referenced the 1971 TV movie Brian's Song, showing the show's continued use of pop culture references that rewarded viewers with broad cultural knowledge. The episode balanced dark subject matter with genuine emotion and comedy in ways that exemplified the peak period's tonal balance. Lois Kills Stewie served as the shocking conclusion to a two-part episode where Stewie appeared to successfully kill Lois and take over the world. The episode featured elaborate action sequences, dark humor, and genuine suspense before revealing the entire scenario was a simulation Stewie was running. The twist ending and the ambitious scope of the two-parter showed the show's willingness to play with audience expectations and invest in larger storytelling experiments. The episodes generated significant discussion and anticipation between parts. Season 6's Back to the Pilot took Brian and Stewie back in time to the show's first episode, allowing Family Guy to reference its own history and make meta-commentary about how the show had evolved. The time travel premise created opportunities for jokes about the show's earlier animation quality, character development, and change dynamics. This self-referential humor appealed to longtime fans who could appreciate the references to the show's evolution while still being accessible to newer viewers. The Former Life of Brian revealed that Brian had a son from a previous relationship, introducing Dylan, who would occasionally recur in later episodes. The episode showed that Family Guy could still introduce new character relationships and expand its mythology even several seasons into its run. The willingness to add continuity elements while maintaining episodic storytelling created a balance that kept the show feeling dynamic. Season 7, running from 2008 to 2009, maintained the quality and ambition of the previous seasons, while showing the beginning of subtle shifts that would become more pronounced in later years. Love Blackshally, from Season 7, featured Brian dating a black woman and dealing with the cultural and social dynamics of interracial relationships. The episode tackled racial themes through comedy in ways that generated both praise and criticism, demonstrating the show's continued willingness to address controversial subjects. Ocean's 3.5 parodied the Ocean's 11 heist film franchise, with the main characters attempting a complex theft. The episode showed Family Guy's continued ability to execute extended parodies and homages to popular films. The heist structure provided a framework for comedy while allowing the show to play with genre conventions and audience expectations about how heist stories typically unfold. I Dream of Jesus featured Peter finding a record of Surfin' Bird and becoming obsessed with the song, playing it constantly to everyone's annoyance. The episode created a massive internet phenomenon with clips of the Bird is the Word sequence spreading virally online. The episode demonstrated how Family Guy could still create cultural moments that extended well beyond its television broadcast. The song became associated with Family Guy even among people who had never seen the full episode. Road to Germany was the second in the Road to series, featuring Stewie and Brian accidentally traveling to Nazi Germany in 1939. The episode combined historical elements with comedy, creating an adventure story within Family Guy's universe. The episode's higher production values and cinematic scope demonstrated the resources Fox was willing to invest in these special episodes, recognizing them as potential event programming. Season 7's Not All Dogs Go to Heaven featured Brian publicly declaring his atheism and facing backlash from religious residents of Quahog. The episode generated significant controversy for its treatment of religion and became one of the most complained about episodes in terms of viewer feedback to the network. The controversy demonstrated that Family Guy could still generate genuine public response and media attention through its willingness to tackle sensitive subjects. Three Kings presented 3 Stephen King story parodies: Stand By Me, Misery, and The Shawshank Redemption, with Family Guy characters acting out scenarios from these stories. The anthology format allowed the show to execute multiple extended parodies within a single episode, demonstrating versatility in storytelling approaches. The episode appealed to fans of Stephen King's work, while also functioning as comedy for viewers unfamiliar with the source material. Across seasons 5 through 7, fan reception remained consistently enthusiastic and engaged. Online fan communities were active in discussing episodes, creating content, sharing favorite moments, and debating rankings of episodes and seasons. The show's cultural presence during this period was significant, with references, quotes, and clips circulating widely across internet platforms. Family Guy had become part of the cultural conversation in ways that extended beyond just its viewership numbers. The ratings during this period remained strong, with Family Guy consistently performing well in its Sunday night time slot and contributing to Fox's animation dominance. The show was winning its time slot among desired demographics and generating advertising revenue that justified continued investment. The commercial success meant the show had job security and the resources to attempt ambitious episodes and maintain high production values. The DVD and merchandise sales during this period continued to be robust. Each season's DVD release sold well, and Family Guy merchandise, including clothing, toys, and other products, was readily available and selling. The franchise's commercial viability created multiple revenue streams beyond just advertising, making Family Guy valuable to Fox as a multimedia property rather than just a television show. The voice cast during this period delivered some of their most memorable performances. Seth MacFarlane's work as Peter, Brian, Stewie, and Quagmire showed complete mastery of these characters, able to deliver both comedic and occasional dramatic moments effectively. The supporting cast, including Alex Borstein, Seth Green, and Mila Kunis, provided strong performances that grounded the more absurdist elements of the show in recognizable character work. The animation quality during seasons 5 through 7 represented the show at its visual peak in terms of balancing improved digital techniques with the character designs and visual style that defined Family Guy. The animation was smooth and polished enough to execute complex visual gags and action sequences, while retaining enough of the show's original aesthetic to feel continuous with earlier seasons. Later seasons would show even more technical polish, which some fans felt moved too far from the show's original visual character. The writing staff during this period included several writers who would go on to significant careers in television comedy. The writers' room was generating content at a rapid pace to feed Family Guy's demand for constant jokes, cutaway gags, and pop culture references. The collaborative environment reportedly fostered competition among writers to pitch the funniest or most outrageous ideas, creating a creative pressure that produced the show's densely packed comedy. The musical elements during this period were particularly strong, with elaborate musical numbers in episodes like PTV and the various Road 2 specials. Composer Walter Murphy and his team created original songs that functioned both as comedy and as genuinely entertaining musical performances. The show's commitment to high-quality musical production elevated episodes that featured songs and demonstrated production values that went beyond typical animated sitcom standards. The guest voice actors during seasons 5 through 7 included numerous celebrities and notable performers who were willing to appear on Family Guy, recognizing the show's cultural cachet and reach. The willingness of high-profile guests to participate indicated the show's status as a significant cultural property, where appearances were valuable for celebrity profiles. Looking at fan rankings and discussions from online communities, seasons 5 through 7 consistently appear at or near the top of favorite season lists. Individual episodes from this period dominate lists of best Family Guy episodes. The combination of creative confidence, production quality, cultural relevance, and consistent output created a run that many fans point to as representing Family Guy at its absolute best. The show's ability during this period to balance different types of comedy, from crude shock humor to more sophisticated satire, from absurdist cutaway gags to genuine character moments, created a viewing experience that could appeal to multiple types of comedy fans. This versatility meant the show was not just serving a narrow niche, but reaching a broader audience who could find different things to appreciate in the comedy. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Yet even within this peak period, subtle shifts in storytelling and structure were beginning to emerge that would become more pronounced as the show entered its next phase. Section 4. Early Signs of Transition, Season 8. Season 8 of Family Guy, which aired from 2009 to 2010, represents a transitional period where the show remained capable of producing highly praised episodes while also showing signs of the creative and tonal shifts that would characterize later seasons. This season serves as a useful case study in how quality perceptions of long-running shows can become mixed, with individual episodes varying significantly in fan and critical reception. Understanding Season 8 requires recognizing both its strengths and the ways it departed from patterns that had defined the show's peak period. The season premiere, Road to the Multiverse, stands as one of the highest-rated Family Guy episodes of all time, in terms of both fan reception and critical praise. The episode featured Stewie and Brian traveling through alternate universes using a remote control Stewie had invented, allowing them to visit worlds with different rules, aesthetics, and tones. The episode showcased incredible creativity in imagining these different universes, from a Disney-style animated world to a Robot Chicken-style stop-motion universe to a world drawn in the style of classic political cartoons. Road to the Multiverse demonstrated Family Guy at its most ambitious and creative, using the multiverse concept to experiment with different animation styles and comedic approaches within a single episode. The different universes required different animation techniques, showing a level of production ambition that went beyond typical episodes. The episode earned praise for its creativity, technical execution, and the way it used the premise to comment on animation itself and different storytelling approaches. The episode won an Emmy Award for Outstanding Animated Program, giving Family Guy its first Emmy win in this category. The success and acclaim of Road to the Multiverse created high expectations for the rest of Season 8 that the season would struggle to consistently meet. When a premiere episode is recognized as one of the show's best, subsequent episodes risk feeling like disappointments, even when they are objectively solid. The episode's excellence made it harder for the rest of the season to maintain the same level of creative ambition and execution. Family Guy featured Peter discovering he has Jewish ancestry and converting to Judaism, creating cultural and religious comedy. The episode tackled Jewish identity and traditions through Family Guy's irreverent lens, generating both amusement and controversy. The episode demonstrated the show's continued willingness to address religious and cultural topics, though some critics felt the jokes were less sharp than earlier seasons' handling of similar material. Spies Reminiscent of Us served as a tribute to Chevy Chase and Dan Aykroyd, who guest starred in the episode. The episode featured espionage themes and chase sequences, allowing for action comedy that departed from typical Family Guy structure. While the celebrity guests brought attention to the episode, some fans felt the episode prioritized the guest stars over the show's regular characters and dynamics, creating an imbalance that made the episode feel less distinctly Family Guy. Brian's Got a Brand New Bag featured Brian dating a significantly older woman, creating comedy from the age gap and from Peter's discomfort with the relationship. The episode explored age and relationship dynamics while maintaining Family Guy's comedic approach. The episode showed the show could still find new relationship dynamics to explore among its characters, though some felt the execution was not as strong as earlier seasons' relationship-focused episodes. Hannah Banana parodied Miley Cyrus and the Hannah Montana phenomenon, with Stewie becoming obsessed with a teenage pop star. The episode's satire of teen pop culture and manufactured celebrity reflected Family Guy's continued engagement with contemporary pop culture, though some critics noted that the pop culture references were becoming more prominent relative to character-driven comedy compared to earlier seasons. Road to the North Pole was the third Road to special, featuring Stewie and Brian traveling to the North Pole to kill Santa Claus after a bad mall Santa experience. The episode subverted Christmas special conventions while creating a story with genuine stakes and surprising emotional resonance. The episode demonstrated that the Road to format could still produce fresh and engaging content, with strong animation and musical elements that justified these episodes' higher production budgets. Extra Large Medium became one of Family Guy's most controversial episodes due to a joke about Sarah Palin's son Trig that generated significant media attention and criticism from Palin herself. The controversy demonstrated that Family Guy could still generate genuine public response and media coverage through its willingness to make jokes that others considered off-limits. However, some observers noted that the controversy felt more manufactured or forced than earlier controversies, suggesting the show might be courting outrage more deliberately. Go Stewie Go featured Stewie disguising himself as a girl to join a play, creating gender-bending comedy. The episode played with gender identity themes through its absurdist premise, showing Family Guy's continued willingness to explore potentially sensitive topics through comedy. The execution was generally well received by fans, though some critics noted the episode did not push boundaries as effectively as earlier seasons might have with similar material. The Splendid Source featured Peter, Joe, and Quagmire tracking down the origin of a dirty joke, creating a quest narrative structure. The episode used the joke origin premise to comment on joke-telling itself and the nature of crude humor, creating meta-comedy about the type of content Family Guy regularly featured. The episode was moderately well received, though some felt it represented Family Guy becoming too self-referential and meta at the expense of more straightforward comedy. Critical reception of Season 8 as a whole was notably more mixed than Seasons 5 through 7 had been. While Road to the Multiverse received nearly universal praise, and the season had other well-regarded episodes, reviewers began noting patterns that would become more pronounced in later seasons. These included increased reliance on pop culture references over character-driven comedy, more formulaic cutaway gag usage, and occasional episodes that felt like they were going through familiar motions rather than finding fresh approaches. Fan reception during Season 8 also showed more variation than previous peak seasons. While dedicated fans still enjoyed most episodes, and the show maintained its audience, online discussions began including more criticism and disappointment alongside the praise. Some fans began expressing that the show was not as consistently funny as it had been, though others defended the season and the show overall. This split in fan response marked a shift from the more unified enthusiasm of earlier peak seasons. The season's ratings remained solid overall, with Family Guy continuing to perform well in its Sunday night slot and maintaining its value to Fox. However, there were signs that the show's ratings growth had plateaued or slightly declined compared to the peak of seasons 5 through 7. While still successful by most measures, the show was no longer showing the upward trajectory that had characterized the post-revival period. The animation quality in Season 8 showed continued technical polish and improvement in digital techniques. The show looked smoother and more refined than ever from a technical standpoint. However, some fans began expressing that the increased polish was moving Family Guy's aesthetic away from what had made the earlier seasons visually distinctive. The cleaner, more computer-assisted animation felt less rough and immediate than the earlier season's style, creating a subtle shift in the show's visual character. The writing during Season 8 showed the influence of staff turnover and evolution in the writers' room. Some writers who had been with the show during its peak period had moved on to other projects, and new writers had joined the staff. This natural evolution in any long-running show's creative team can bring fresh perspectives, though it can also shift the show's sensibility and comic voice. The changes were subtle in Season 8, but would become more pronounced in subsequent seasons. The cutaway gags in Season 8 began showing patterns that some critics identified as formulaic or repetitive. While earlier seasons' cutaways had felt unpredictable and fresh, some Season 8 cutaways felt like variations on established patterns or less carefully integrated into episodes. The density of cutaways remained high, maintaining Family Guy's rapid-fire joke style, though some fans felt the quality of individual cutaways was declining, even as quantity remained constant. The balance between crude shock humor and more sophisticated comedy began shifting somewhat in Season 8, with some critics noting that the show was leaning more heavily on crude or gross-out humor than it had during the peak period. Episodes like Brian's Got a Brand New Bag and Jerome is the New Black featured material that some viewers found more uncomfortable than funny, suggesting the show might be losing some of its ability to balance different types of comedy effectively. The celebrity guest appearances in Season 8 continued to be frequent, with the show regularly featuring well-known actors, musicians, and public figures. While guest stars can add novelty and draw viewers, some critics noted that Family Guy was relying increasingly on celebrity cameos to generate interest, rather than trusting its core characters and writing to carry episodes. The balance between using guests to enhance episodes and using them to compensate for weaker material became a point of discussion. The Road 2 episodes remained highlights that generally received positive reception, suggesting that when Family Guy invested in higher concept, more ambitious episodes, it could still deliver content that felt special and justified the show's continued production. These episodes demonstrated that the show's capacity for creative excellence had not disappeared, even if it was being applied less consistently across all episodes. The musical numbers in Season 8, particularly in Road to the North Pole, showed continued strong production values and creativity. The show's musical elements remained a strength that could elevate episodes and provide variety in storytelling approaches. The commitment to quality musical production indicated that resources were still being invested in making Family Guy episodes feel polished and ambitious when material called for it. Season 8's relationship with current events and topical humor became more pronounced, with episodes addressing contemporary political and cultural figures and situations. While this topical approach could make episodes feel current and relevant at the time of broadcast, it also meant they might age less well as references became dated. Earlier seasons had balanced topical material with more timeless comedy, while Season 8 leaned more heavily toward contemporary references. The season's handling of ongoing character development and continuity showed Family Guy still willing to occasionally develop its characters or create consequences that persisted across episodes. However, the balance between episodic storytelling and ongoing development remained weighted heavily toward episodic, with most episodes resetting to baseline by their conclusion. This approach provided flexibility for writers while potentially limiting opportunities for deeper character exploration. Looking at Season 8 in retrospect, it represents a pivot point, where the show remained capable of excellence, as evidenced by Road to the Multiverse and other strong episodes, while also showing early signs of the patterns that would characterize later seasons' more mixed reception. The season did not represent a sudden drop in quality so much as the beginning of gradual shifts in approach, consistency, and balance that would become more apparent over time. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. This mixed reception foreshadowed broader shifts in how fans and critics would perceive the show's direction, particularly as the series entered its second decade on air. Section 5. Fan reassessment and the decline narrative. By the time Family Guy reached its 10th season in 2011, conversations among fans and critics had begun to shift in notable ways. While the show remained popular and commercially successful, drawing solid ratings and maintaining its place in Fox's Sunday night animation block, a growing segment of the fan base started expressing dissatisfaction with the show's direction. Season 10 specifically became a focal point in discussions about when Family Guy stopped feeling like it was operating at peak quality, with many fans pointing to this season as representing a noticeable departure from the creative heights of earlier years. The shift in fan perception did not happen suddenly or uniformly. Family Guy had accumulated millions of viewers over its run, and different segments of the audience had different relationships with the show, and different expectations for what it should be. Longtime fans, who had watched since the original 1999 premiere, had one perspective. Fans who discovered the show during the revival period had another. Newer viewers who came to the show in syndication or through streaming had yet another viewpoint. These different audience segments experienced Season 10 and subsequent seasons through different lenses of familiarity and expectation. Online fan communities, which had grown significantly since Family Guy's early years, became spaces where dissatisfaction could be voiced and amplified. Forums, Reddit discussions, and social media platforms allowed fans to share their critiques and find others who felt similarly. This collective expression of disappointment created a narrative that Family Guy was declining in quality, a narrative that gained momentum as more fans articulated similar feelings. The internet's ability to aggregate and amplify these opinions made the perception of decline feel more widespread and significant than it might have in an earlier era without such connected fan communities. Season 10 itself provided material that both satisfied and disappointed different viewers. The season premiere, Lottery Fever, featured the Griffins winning the lottery and dealing with sudden wealth. The premise was relatively conventional for sitcom storytelling, and some fans felt the execution relied too heavily on predictable plot beats, rather than finding fresh approaches to the material. The episode was not poorly received universally, yet it did not generate the enthusiasm or memorable moments that earlier season premieres had achieved. Screams of Silence, the story of Brenda Q, from season 10, tackled the serious subject of domestic violence through Quagmire's sister Brenda being in an abusive relationship. The episode attempted to address domestic abuse while maintaining comedic elements, creating a tonal balance that many viewers found uncomfortable or inappropriate. The episode generated significant discussion about whether Family Guy could or should attempt to tackle serious social issues, with some praising the attempt to address domestic violence, and others feeling the show's comedic approach trivialized. Serious subject matter. Back to the Pilot revisited the time travel concept with Brian and Stewie returning to the show's first episode, allowing for meta commentary on how Family Guy had changed over the years. While the concept had potential for interesting self-reflection, some fans felt the execution did not fully capitalize on the premise, and that the episode was more concerned with pointing out differences than exploring what those differences meant for the show's evolution. The season 10 episode, Meg and Quagmire, featured inappropriate sexual content involving Meg that many fans found uncomfortable rather than funny. The episode pushed boundaries in ways that generated criticism even from viewers generally comfortable with Family Guy's crude humor. The episode became an example that critics of the show's direction pointed to as evidence that Family Guy was confusing shock value with actual comedy, relying on being offensive or transgressive without crafting jokes that justified the offensive content. Brian's play featured Brian writing a terrible play and being unable to accept criticism, using Brian's character to satirize artistic pretension and inability to handle negative feedback. The episode was generally better received than some other season 10 installments, suggesting the show could still produce solid episodes when focusing on character-driven comedy. However, even well-received season 10 episodes tended to be described as good rather than great, lacking the spark that had made peak-era episodes feel special. Fan rankings and season tier lists that circulated online consistently placed Season 10 lower than Seasons 4 through 7. While rankings are subjective and vary among individual fans, the aggregate pattern showed Season 10 being viewed less favorably than the peak period seasons. These rankings became reference points in discussions about the show's quality trajectory, with Season 10 frequently cited as where the decline became undeniable for many viewers who had been willing to give earlier seasons the benefit of the doubt. The conversation about Family Guy's perceived decline often centered on the show feeling more formulaic and predictable than it had during its peak. Fans expressed that they could anticipate joke structures, that cutaway gags felt more routine, and that character behaviors had become exaggerated to the point of feeling like caricatures rather than characters. These critiques suggested that familiarity was breeding a kind of contempt, where patterns that had once felt fresh now felt tired through repetition.
The density of pop culture references in Season 10 and surrounding seasons became a point of criticism.
While Family Guy had always incorporated pop culture into its comedy, critics felt the show was increasingly using references as substitutes for actual jokes, rather than as elements within jokes. A cutaway referencing a movie or TV show without adding meaningful commentary or twisting the reference in creative ways felt lazy compared to earlier seasons' more sophisticated use of pop culture material. The show's approach to meta-humor and self-awareness also evolved in ways that divided audiences. Family Guy had always included meta jokes and fourth wall breaks, acknowledging its own status as a TV show. However, Season 10 era Family Guy seemed increasingly focused on commenting on itself, on television production, and on its own reception rather than on external targets. While some viewers enjoyed this self-referential approach, others felt it represented creative exhaustion, with the show having less to say about the world and more to say about itself. The emotional tone of Season 10 episodes felt different to many viewers compared to earlier seasons. While Family Guy had never been a show primarily concerned with emotional depth, earlier seasons had occasionally delivered genuine emotional moments that felt earned within the context of absurdist comedy. Season 10 seemed less interested in or capable of achieving these moments, with attempts at sentimentality feeling more perfunctory or even ironic, as if the show was embarrassed by earnestness. The treatment of characters in Season 10 reflected what some fans identified as flanderization, where characters become exaggerated versions of their defining traits rather than fully realized personalities. Peter seemed dumber and more selfish than earlier versions of the character. Brian seemed more pretentious and hypocritical. Meg's status as family punching bag intensified to levels that some viewers found mean-spirited rather than funny. This character evolution through exaggeration created a sense that the show was running on cruise control, amplifying established traits rather than finding new dimensions. The show's political and social commentary in Season 10 also generated mixed responses. Family Guy had always included political material, generally from a liberal or libertarian perspective that mocked both conservative and liberal positions. However, Season 10 era episodes seemed less interested in balanced satire and more willing to make straightforward political statements. For some viewers, this represented the show having clearer values and being willing to take stands. For others, it represented a loss of the irreverent both sides mockery that had characterized earlier seasons. The animation quality in Season 10 was technically superior to earlier seasons in many ways, with smoother character movements, more detailed backgrounds, and cleaner line work. However, this increased polish contributed to a sense for some fans that the show had lost its visual personality. The rougher, more hand-drawn aesthetic of earlier seasons had given Family Guy a particular look that the more digitally refined Season 10 animation lacked. This created a situation where technical improvement paradoxically made the show feel less distinctive visually. The voice acting remained professional and competent in Season 10, with the core cast continuing to deliver their characters effectively. However, some fans noted that performances seemed more routine, with actors delivering lines efficiently without the energy or commitment that had characterized earlier seasons. This perception might reflect familiarity more than actual change in performance quality, though it contributed to the overall sense that Season 10 represented Family Guy operating on autopilot. The musical elements in Season 10 continued to show high production values, with elaborate songs and musical numbers in certain episodes. However, the frequency of musical episodes or sequences had increased to the point where they felt less special than earlier seasons' occasional musical moments. What had once been a treat became expected, reducing the impact of musical comedy and making it feel more like a formula the show relied on, rather than a tool it deployed strategically. The show's relationship with current events in Season 10 continued to emphasize topical humor, referencing contemporary political figures, celebrity scandals, and cultural moments. This approach created episodes that felt current and relevant at broadcast, but also meant they aged quickly as references became dated. Watching Season 10 episodes years later often required remembering or looking up what was happening culturally in 2011 and 2012 to understand jokes, creating a barrier to enjoyment that more timeless comedy would not have. The guest star appearances in Season 10 remained frequent, with celebrities continuing to appear in voice roles. However, the novelty of celebrity guests had worn off by this point in the show's run, and their presence did not generate the excitement or cultural attention it once had. Guest appearances felt more routine, with celebrities appearing because Family Guy was a platform they could access, rather than because their specific involvement added something unique to episode.
The critical reception from professional television critics for Season 10 was largely negative or indifferent, with reviewers who continued covering the show expressing fatigue and disappointment. However, critical opinion mattered less for Family Guy than audience response and ratings, which remained solid enough to justify renewal. The disconnect between critical opinion and commercial success reflected a pattern where Family Guy had a devoted audience that continued watching regardless of critical consensus. The DVD sales and streaming viewership for Season 10 showed some decline compared to peak seasons, though the show remained commercially viable across multiple platforms. The shift towards streaming as a primary way audiences consumed content was beginning to change how shows like Family Guy were monetized and how their success was measured. Season 10 existed in a transitional period for television distribution and consumption patterns. Fan discussions about Season 10 often invoke nostalgia for earlier seasons, with viewers expressing that they wished Family Guy still felt like it did during seasons 4 through 7. This nostalgia complicated assessments of Season 10's actual quality, as the season was being judged not just on its own merits, but against idealized memories of earlier seasons. The show could not win this comparison because it could not recapture the novelty and freshness that earlier seasons had possessed, simply by virtue of coming first. The online discourse about Season 10 sometimes included discussions of whether the show should end, with some fans arguing that Family Guy had run its course and should conclude, while others maintain that the show still had value, even if it was not operating at peak quality. These conversations reflected a broader question about how long successful shows should continue, balancing the interests of fans who wanted more content against the reality that creative resources and inspiration might be finite. The Season 10 narrative of decline was not universally accepted, with many fans continuing to enjoy the show and finding the criticism exaggerated or unfair. Defenders of Season 10 argue that the show was being held to impossible standards, that comedy is subjective, and that Family Guy was still funnier than most alternatives on television. This split in fan response created ongoing debates within fan communities about the show's quality and whether criticism was justified. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. This perception of decline leads directly into examining what precisely changed in the show's humor and comedic approach compared to the sharp satire that had defined its peak years. Section 6. Humor shifts. From sharp satire to familiar gags. The evolution of Family Guy's comedy style from its early seasons through Season 10 and beyond represents one of the most frequently discussed aspects of the show's perceived decline. Understanding what changed requires examining the specific types of humor the show employed, how those types shifted in frequency and execution, and what those shifts meant for the viewing experience. The transformation from fresh, boundary-pushing satire to more formulaic, familiar comedy patterns did not occur overnight. Yet, by Season 10, the cumulative effect of gradual changes had created a noticeably different comedic landscape than what had defined the show's golden age. Early Family Guy episodes, particularly in Seasons 1 through 3, employed satire that felt genuinely sharp and willing to challenge audiences. The show mocked political figures, cultural institutions, television itself, and American life with a particular edge that came from genuine irreverence rather than calculated offensiveness. Episodes like Let's Go to the Hop from Season 2, which satirized anti-drug campaigns through an absurd storyline about toad licking, showed the show using exaggeration and absurdity to make points about moral panic and ineffective messaging around drugs. The satire had a target and a perspective, using comedy to critique something specific. The cutaway gags in early seasons often served satirical purposes beyond just generating laughs. When Peter would compare a situation to something else, and the show would cut away to illustrate that comparison, the cutaway frequently contained social commentary or observations about human behavior embedded within the absurdist premise. The randomness of early cutaways masked sophisticated comedy that rewarded viewers who caught the implications beyond the surface-level joke. The early seasons also demonstrated a willingness to satirize the medium of television itself, making jokes about sitcom conventions, television production, and audience expectations. This meta-awareness felt fresh because it was deployed selectively rather than constantly, creating moments where the show stepped back from its narrative to comment on the artificiality of that narrative. The balance between staying within the story and breaking the fourth wall created variety in comedic approach.
As Family Guy progressed into its revival and peak period in seasons 4 through 7, the satire remained present and often quite effective. Episodes like PTV directly challenged FCC censorship policies through extended musical numbers and narrative that made clear points about free speech and moral policing. The show was willing to have perspectives and to use comedy to advocate for those perspectives, creating satire that felt purposeful even when wrapped in crude or absurdist humor. The peak period also showed the show's ability to satirize specific aspects of American culture through extended sequences or entire episodes. The various Road to specials often included satirical elements alongside their adventure narratives, commenting on historical periods, social attitudes, or cultural phenomena while maintaining entertaining storylines. This integration of satire into larger narrative structures showed sophistication in how comedy could work at multiple levels simultaneously. However, subtle shifts were beginning even during the peak period that would become more pronounced in later seasons. The cutaway gags were becoming more frequent and more random, sometimes losing the satirical edge or social observation that had made earlier cutaways feel more substantial than just quick jokes. As the show aged, the cutaways increasingly felt like opportunities for rapid-fire gags rather than moments of commentary, changing their function within episodes from commentary devices to pure joke delivery systems. By season 10, many fans and critics observed that cutaway gags felt interchangeable and formulaic. The structure would be familiar. A character would mention something, often using specific phrasing like, "This is worse than the time I," or, "You know what this reminds me of?" And the show would cut to an unrelated scene showing the comparison. The setups became predictable, and the cutaway scenes themselves often relied on recognition or reference, rather than adding new comedic ideas to what was being referenced. The distinction between satire and reference became increasingly important in understanding the humor shift. Satire uses exaggeration, irony, or ridicule to criticize or comment on something, creating meaning beyond just acknowledging the thing exists. A reference simply calls attention to something from pop culture, assuming that recognition itself is amusing, or that mentioning something familiar creates comedy. Early Family Guy generally satirized even when referencing, while later Family Guy increasingly just referenced without adding satirical perspective. Season 10 episodes frequently included cutaways that were purely referential, showing a scene from a movie or TV show with Family Guy characters inserted without fundamentally changing or commenting on the source material. The humor relied on viewers recognizing what was being referenced and finding the incongruity of seeing Family Guy characters in that context amusing. This approach wore thin for many viewers who felt that recognition humor was less satisfying than actual jokes built on the foundation of references. The pop culture knowledge required to fully appreciate Family Guy had always been part of its appeal, rewarding viewers who caught references that others might miss. However, the balance shifted over time toward requiring more specific pop culture knowledge while providing less payoff for having that knowledge. Early seasons would take a cultural reference and transform it into something new through the show's perspective. Later seasons increasingly presented cultural references relatively unchanged, making the reference itself the entire joke. The density of references in Season 10 era episodes meant that viewers were expected to recognize multiple movies, TV shows, celebrities, and cultural moments within each episode. While this rewarded viewers with broad pop culture knowledge, it also created barriers for viewers less familiar with American pop culture or too young to remember references from earlier decades. This shift potentially narrowed the show's accessibility even as it maintained its core audience. The show's approach to controversial or boundary-pushing humor also evolved in ways that affected comedic impact. Early Family Guy generated controversy by making jokes about subjects that were genuinely taboo or by approaching familiar subjects from unexpected angles. The boundary pushing felt motivated by comedic vision rather than by desire to shock. By season 10, some of the controversial material felt more calculated, with the show seeming to deliberately court outrage or push buttons without the jokes justifying the offensive content. The mean-spirited quality of some season 10 humor represented another shift from earlier seasons. While Family Guy had never been gentle comedy, early seasons' cruelty generally served satirical purposes or targeted characters in ways that felt justified by comedic context. Season 10 era episodes sometimes included meanness that felt gratuitous, with characters being cruel to each other in ways that did not serve narrative or comedic purposes beyond shock value. The treatment of Meg became particularly notable, with the family's abuse of her intensifying to levels that many viewers found uncomfortable rather than funny.
The evolution of how Meg was treated across seasons exemplifies the shift in humor style. Early seasons established Meg as unpopular and somewhat neglected, creating comedy from her social struggles and her family's occasional insensitivity. By season 10, the abuse of Meg had intensified to include physical violence, extreme verbal cruelty, and family members expressing genuine hatred toward her. What had begun as satirizing family dynamics had evolved into something that felt mean-spirited, without clear satirical purpose. The balance between different types of comedy shifted noticeably between early and later seasons. Early Family Guy mixed physical comedy, verbal wit, satirical commentary, absurdist premises, pop culture parody, and character-based humor in proportions that created variety within and across episodes. Season 10 seemed to rely more heavily on certain types of comedy while neglecting others, creating less variety in the comedic palette. The density of cutaway gags increased while character-based comedy decreased, changing the fundamental texture of episodes. The writing efficiency also seemed to decline in ways that affected humor quality. Early Family Guy episodes felt tightly written, with setups and payoffs carefully structured even within absurdist narratives. Jokes built on each other, callbacks created additional layers, and the rapid-fire style maintained quality alongside quantity. Season 10 episodes sometimes felt looser in their writing, with jokes that did not quite land, setups without adequate payoffs, or gags that went on too long without developing or escalating sufficiently to justify their length. The self-awareness and meta-humor that had always been part of Family Guy's identity became more dominant in later seasons in ways that some viewers felt undermined other types of comedy. When the show constantly comments on itself, acknowledges its own formulas, or makes jokes about being a TV show, it creates distance between the audience and the content. This distance can be funny when deployed strategically. Yet, when overused, it prevents the audience from investing in narratives or caring about characters because the show keeps reminding them that none of it matters. The relationship between setup and punchline in Family Guy jokes evolved in ways that affected comedic rhythm. Early seasons generally followed comedy principles, where setups established expectations that punchlines subverted or fulfilled in unexpected ways. Later seasons sometimes abandoned these principles, with jokes that lacked proper setups or with punchlines that did not adequately connect to their setups. The result was comedy that felt sloppier or less carefully constructed than earlier seasons had been. The timing and pacing of jokes also shifted subtly over the show's run. Early Family Guy had found a rhythm that balanced the rapid-fire delivery of cutaway gags with more sustained comedic sequences and character moments. Season 10 sometimes felt like it was rushing through material, or alternatively dragging out jokes past their natural endpoints. This pacing inconsistency made episodes feel less polished and affected how successfully jokes landed with audiences. The visual comedy in Family Guy had always been a strength, with the animation allowing for sight gags and visual humor that complemented the verbal comedy. However, Season 10 era episodes sometimes relied less on visual creativity and more on verbal references or shock value. The animation remained technically proficient, yet it was being deployed less creatively in service of visual comedy than earlier seasons had done. The result was episodes that felt more talk-heavy and less visually dynamic. The show's use of violence and gross-out humor also intensified in later seasons in ways that divided audiences. Family Guy had always included violent or disgusting content, yet early seasons generally used this content purposefully for shock or to make points. Season 10 sometimes included violence or gross content that felt excessive or unmotivated by comedy, existing for its own sake rather than serving larger comedic purposes. For viewers with lower tolerance for graphic content, this shift made the show less enjoyable. The extended sequences where characters would be injured in elaborate or painful ways became more common and more extreme in Season 10 compared to earlier seasons. What had once been brief moments of cartoon violence extended into longer sequences that some viewers found tedious or unpleasant. The joke seemed to be the violence itself, rather than the violence serving a comedic purpose, representing a shift in how physical comedy was deployed. The political humor in the show evolved from mocking all sides relatively equally to taking clearer positions while still attempting to maintain irreverence. Season 10 episodes sometimes struggled to balance political perspective with the show's traditionally amoral or omnidirectional mockery. This created a tension where the show wanted to make political points while also maintaining its stance as an equal opportunity offender, resulting in political comedy that satisfied neither the desire for clear satire nor the preference for purely offensive humor.
The quality of pop culture parodies also showed decline in execution between early and later seasons. Early Family Guy parodies, like the Wasted Talent episode's Willy Wonka segment, took source material and transformed it through the show's comedic lens, while demonstrating detailed knowledge of what was being parodied. Later parodies sometimes felt more superficial, hitting obvious beats from the source material without adding sufficient new comedic ideas, or demonstrating deep engagement with what was being parodied. The celebrity impersonations and references in Season 10 also reflected the shift toward recognition over satire. Early seasons would impersonate celebrities as part of making points about fame, media, or specific behaviors. Season 10 sometimes included celebrity references simply to acknowledge that the celebrity existed, without adding commentary or perspective on what made that celebrity interesting or worthy of parody. The references felt hollow without the additional layer of meaning that satire would provide. The musical comedy in the show, which had been a strength during peak seasons, also showed signs of becoming formulaic by Season 10. Early musical numbers felt special and were deployed strategically to enhance specific episodes. By Season 10, musical sequences appeared frequently enough that they no longer felt like special events, and the songs themselves sometimes felt less carefully crafted or less integrated into episodes' overall comedic vision. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. These humor shifts intersect directly with how characters were portrayed and developed, as the evolution of the show's cast reflects broader changes in narrative direction and comedic priorities. Section 7. Character Focus and Narrative Direction. The evolution of Family Guy's characters from their early incarnations through Season 10 and beyond represents one of the clearest indicators of how the show changed over time. Character development, or the lack thereof, became a focal point in discussions about the show's perceived decline. Many fans and critics observe that characters who had once felt like recognizable people with distinct personalities and believable motivations gradually transformed into exaggerated caricatures defined entirely by their most extreme traits. This process, often called Flanderization, after a similar evolution of Ned Flanders on The Simpsons, affected nearly every major character on Family Guy in ways that changed how episodes functioned and how audiences connected with the show. Peter Griffin's character transformation exemplifies how Flanderization altered Family Guy's dynamics. In early seasons, Peter was portrayed as a well-meaning father and husband who struggled with responsibility and impulse control. He made poor decisions and behaved selfishly, yet he also showed genuine love for his family, felt remorse when he hurt people, and occasionally displayed insight or emotional depth. Episodes like Death Has a Shadow from Season 1 showed Peter trying to fix his mistakes and ultimately facing consequences while maintaining family bonds. His character had dimensions that made him more than just a source of chaos. As seasons progressed, Peter's stupidity and selfishness intensified to levels that strained believability even within the show's absurdist framework. By Season 10, Peter was portrayed as almost impossibly unintelligent, unable to grasp basic concepts or remember simple information. His selfishness extended to actively harming his family and friends without apparent concern or remorse. The emotional depth that had occasionally surfaced in early seasons became rare, with Peter functioning primarily as a vehicle for destructive behavior and crude jokes. The episode Screams of Silence, the story of Brenda Q from Season 10, showed Peter's Flanderization in stark terms. When dealing with Quagmire's sister's domestic abuse situation, Peter displayed such extreme insensitivity and stupidity that his behavior became difficult to reconcile with the character who had shown capacity for growth and empathy in earlier seasons. The Flanderization had progressed to the point where Peter could not function appropriately, even in serious situations, limiting the types of stories the show could tell with him. Lois Griffin's character evolution also reflected the show's changing priorities and tone. Early seasons established Lois as the responsible parent trying to manage her chaotic family while occasionally revealing her own rebellious past and capacity for wildness. She served as a grounding force while also being a fully realized character with her own desires, frustrations, and contradiction. Episodes like Lethal Weapons from Season 3 showed Lois could be both a responsible mother and someone with her own agency and complexity. By Season 10, Lois had evolved into a character whose primary functions were tolerating Peter's behavior and occasionally expressing frustration before ultimately accepting whatever chaos he had created. Her own personality became less defined, with the show seeming uncertain about what role she should play beyond being Peter's wife and the family's designated adult. The rebellious or wild aspects of her character appeared less frequently, And when they did, they felt more like plot devices than organic expressions of her personality.
Meg Griffin's transformation represents perhaps the most extreme example of Flanderization in Family Guy's cast. Early seasons established Meg as unpopular at school and somewhat overlooked by her family, creating comedy from realistic teenage struggles with social acceptance and family dynamics. The humor came from recognizable situations exaggerated for comic effect, with Meg remaining a sympathetic character whose struggles audiences could relate to even while laughing at her misfortunes. The intensification of Meg's role as family punching bag fundamentally changed her character and the show's tone. By season 10, Meg was subjected to extreme verbal abuse, physical violence, and expressions of genuine hatred from her family. Episodes like Seahorse Seashell Party from season 10 attempted to address this dynamic by having Meg stand up to her family, only to have her ultimately accept her role as scapegoat because the family supposedly needed someone to abuse. This resolution suggested the show was aware of how Meg's treatment had evolved, yet chose to embrace and justify it, rather than course correct. The shift in how Meg was treated reflected broader changes in Family Guy's approach to character relationships. Early seasons showed family members who genuinely cared about each other, despite conflicts and dysfunction. Later seasons increasingly portrayed family relationships as purely antagonistic, with characters expressing active dislike or indifference toward each other. This shift made the show feel meaner and reduced opportunities for the emotional moments that had occasionally balanced the crude humor in earlier seasons. Chris Griffin's character remained relatively stable compared to other family members, though he too showed signs of Flanderization. Early seasons portrayed Chris as dim and awkward, yet sweet-natured and occasionally insightful. His artistic talent and sensitive personality provided dimensions beyond just being the stupid son. By season 10, Chris's stupidity had intensified, and his characterization focused increasingly on gross or disturbing behavior, rather than on his more sympathetic qualities. The character became less nuanced and more purely a source of uncomfortable comedy. Stewie Griffin's evolution represents one of the most dramatic character transformations in the series. Early seasons presented Stewie as an evil genius baby plotting world domination and matricide, speaking in a British accent and possessing intelligence and sophistication wildly incongruous with his infant status. This absurd premise generated unique comedy and allowed for storylines unavailable to other characters. Episodes like Mission Impossible from season 3 showed Stewie pursuing elaborate schemes while maintaining his distinct personality. As seasons progressed, Stewie's murderous intentions and world domination plots gradually disappeared, replaced by a character whose primary traits became his relationship with Brian and his ambiguous sexuality. By season 10, Stewie rarely, if ever, discussed killing Lois or taking over the world, with these defining early characteristics apparently abandoned. The show never explicitly addressed this character evolution, creating continuity confusion about whether Stewie had changed or whether the earlier characterization had simply been forgotten. The shift in Stewie's characterization opened some new comedic avenues, particularly in the Road to episodes, where his dynamic with Brian drove adventure stories. However, it also represented a loss of the character's original edge and uniqueness. The baby who had once been a genuine threat became primarily a source of gay panic jokes and sophisticated cultural commentary, fundamentally altering what the character contributed to the show. Brian Griffin's transformation became one of the most discussed character evolutions in Family Guy. Early seasons established Brian as the voice of reason and liberal conscience, the intellectual who commented on the absurdity around him while maintaining his own flaws and contradictions. Episodes like Brian in Love from season 2 showed him dealing with genuine emotional struggles while maintaining his role as the show's most grounded character. As seasons progressed, Brian's character increasingly became a vehicle for the show to mock liberal pretension and pseudo-intellectualism. His hypocrisy, self-importance, and failed artistic ambitions were emphasized to the point where Brian transformed from sympathetic intellectual to insufferable, pretentious failure. Episodes like Brian Writes a Bestseller from season 9 centered entirely on mocking Brian's literary pretensions, with the character having evolved into someone whose every attempt at intellectual or artistic achievement was destined for failure and mockery. By season 10, Brian's character had become so unlikable that his role in episodes often involved being punished or humiliated for his pretensions. The character who had once served as audience surrogate and voice of reason became someone the show seemed to actively dislike, changing the dynamic of how he could function in storylines. The evolution limited the types of episodes that could feature Brian prominently, while maintaining audience sympathy or investment. The supporting characters also showed flanderization patterns that affected the show's comedic landscape. Glenn Quagmire evolved from sex-obsessed neighbor to character whose sexual deviancy reached criminal levels, with jokes about his behavior becoming increasingly dark and less playful. Joe Swanson's defining characteristic as a disabled police officer became the sole focus of his characterization, with episodes using his disability for shock humor rather than as one aspect of a fully realized person. Cleveland Brown's mild-mannered personality intensified to the point of passive ineffectuality before the character left for his own spin-off series. The flanderization of characters limited narrative possibilities and reduced the emotional range episodes could achieve. When characters are defined entirely by extreme traits, they cannot participate in nuanced storytelling or generate comedy from realistic situations. The characters became tools for delivering specific types of jokes rather than people whose personalities could generate comedy through their interactions and reactions to situations. The loss of character depth also affected how audiences connected with the show. Early Family Guy allowed viewers to care about characters even while laughing at their flaws and failures. The exaggerated versions of characters in later seasons made emotional investment difficult because the characters no longer behaved in ways that felt connected to recognizable human psychology or motivation. They became purely comedic constructs rather than characters existing within a coherent world. The character transformations also created continuity issues where episodes would reference earlier characterizations or relationships without acknowledging how drastically characters had changed. Flashback episodes, or references to early events, highlighted the disconnect between early and later versions of characters, making the show's internal continuity feel inconsistent or contradictory. Some defenders of later season Family Guy argued that character evolution was natural and necessary for a long-running show, that static characters would become boring, and that flanderization allowed for new types of comedy that earlier characterizations would not permit. This perspective held that Family Guy was a comedy show where consistency mattered less than generating laughs, and that criticizing character evolution missed the point of what the show was trying to be. However, critics of the flanderization pointed to other long-running animated comedies that maintained character consistency while still evolving their shows. The Simpsons, despite its own quality debates, had largely maintained core character traits across its run. South Park had evolved its characters while keeping their fundamental personalities recognizable. The argument suggested that character flanderization was a choice rather than an inevitability. The narrative direction of Family Guy also shifted in response to these character changes. Early seasons could tell stories about family dynamics, personal growth, relationship conflicts, and emotional struggles because characters had enough depth to support such narratives. Later seasons increasingly relied on high-concept premises, elaborate parodies, or shock humor because the flanderized characters could not support more grounded storytelling. Episodes from Season 10 frequently featured premises that were purely vehicles for jokes rather than stories emerging from character motivations or relationships. The characters would be inserted into situations to facilitate humor without the situations feeling like natural outgrowths of who the characters were or what they cared about. This shift made episodes feel more arbitrary and less connected to a coherent fictional world. The relationship dynamics between characters also suffered from flanderization. The friendship between Peter and Brian, which had been central to many classic episodes, became less prominent as both characters became more extreme versions of themselves. The marriage between Peter and Lois became harder to understand as their characters evolved into people who seemingly had nothing in common and no reason to stay together. The family unit itself felt less like a family and more like a collection of individuals who happened to live in the same house. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Character portrayal connects directly to thematic and narrative innovation, areas where Family Guy's experimentation with structure and meta-humor generated increasingly mixed responses from its audience. Section 8. Experimentation and Audience Reaction. As Family Guy progressed through its run, particularly from Season 8 onward, the show demonstrated increasing willingness to experiment with episode structure, narrative techniques, and comedic different approaches that departed from its established formula. This experimentation represented the creative team attempting to keep the show fresh and avoid falling into complete predictability. However, audience reactions to these experimental episodes were notably mixed, with some experiments praised for ambition and creativity, while others were criticized for being self-indulgent or losing sight of what made Family Guy work. Understanding how experimentation evolved and how audiences responded reveals important aspects of the show's changing relationship with its viewership. The Road To episodes represented one of the show's most successful experimental formats. Beginning with Road to Rupert in Season 5, These episodes featured Stewie and Brian on adventures with higher production values, different animation styles, and more cinematic storytelling than standard episodes. Road to the Multiverse, from Season 8, as discussed earlier, showcased this format at its peak, with the multiverse premise allowing for radical experimentation with animation techniques ranging from Disney-style hand-drawn animation to robot, chicken-style stop-motion to realistic CGI rendering. The success of Road to the Multiverse demonstrated that when Family Guy committed fully to experimental concepts with adequate resources and execution, audiences responded enthusiastically. The episode won an Emmy Award and is consistently ranked among the best Family Guy episodes ever produced. The Road to format proved that deviation from standard structure could enhance rather than detract from the show when done with clear creative vision and quality execution. However, the Road to episodes also represented a departure from the show's core concept of family sitcom comedy. These episodes essentially functioned as standalone adventure stories that could have featured any two characters with good chemistry, rather than specifically requiring the Griffin family context. As these episodes became more frequent and elaborate, some fans questioned whether they represented Family Guy at its best or whether they were the show compensating for inability to generate quality comedy from its standard format. The production resources devoted to Road to episodes were substantial, with each entry requiring more time, money, and staff effort than regular episodes. The different animation styles meant that specialized animators needed to be brought in or trained for specific sequences. The musical numbers featured in most Road to episodes required composers, arrangers, and recording sessions with full orchestras. This resource investment demonstrated Fox's commitment to Family Guy as a premium property worthy of special treatment. The anthology episodes represented another experimental format that Family Guy employed with varying success. Episodes like Family Guy Viewer Mail from Season 3 and Season 10's Viewer Mail Number 2 presented multiple short stories within a single episode, often featuring the regular characters in alternate scenarios or settings. These anthology formats allowed the show to try different ideas without committing entire episodes to concepts that might not sustain full narratives. The anthology format also allowed Family Guy to experiment with different animation styles, time periods, and genres within single episodes. Three Kings from Season 7 presented Stephen King's story parodies, demonstrating how anthology structure could facilitate extended parodies that might feel constrained within standard episode structures. The format gave writers freedom to explore ideas that would not fit conventional Family Guy episodes, while still delivering enough content for a full broadcast. However, anthology episodes also highlighted the challenge of maintaining quality across multiple short stories. While anthology formats allowed more ideas to be attempted, they also meant that weak segments could not be avoided by simply turning off the episode, as they were interspersed with potentially stronger material. Audience reactions to anthology episodes varied based on how successful individual segments were and whether the anthology format felt justified by the content or merely a gimmick. The increasing use of meta-humor and fourth wall breaking represented another major experimental direction in later Family Guy seasons. While the show had always included some self-aware jokes and acknowledgement of its status as a television program, Season 8 onward showed intensification of this approach. Episodes would regularly reference their own structure, acknowledge contrivances, comment on the show's reputation, or make jokes about television production and network requirements. And then there were fewer from Season 9, represented an ambitious experiment in Family Guy doing a murder mystery parody over a full hour-long special. The episode gathered the show's extended cast at a mansion where characters were systematically murdered in a parody of classic mystery stories. The extended runtime allowed for more elaborate plotting and more sustained narrative tension than typical episodes could achieve, representing the show's confidence that it could sustain audience attention for twice its normal length. The special demonstrated Family Guy's ability to execute high-concept episodes with appropriate ambition and resources. The mystery structure worked reasonably well, character deaths created genuine surprise, and the episode felt like an event that justified its special status. However, some critics noted that the episode's dark tone and murder of established characters felt at odds with the show's typically consequence-free episodic structure, and that subsequent episodes largely ignored the deaths, undermining the supposed permanence of the special's events. The deaths in And Then There Were Fewer raised questions about continuity and consequences in Family Guy's universe. Characters who died in the special included Muriel Goldman, Diane Simmons, Stephanie, Priscilla, Derek, and James Woods. The fact that these deaths were treated as permanent within the show's continuity represented an unusual commitment to consequences for Family Guy, where most episodes reset to baseline by their conclusion. However, the murdered characters were largely minor recurring characters rather than core cast members, limiting the actual impact of their permanent removal. The increasing frequency of musical episodes or sequences represented another experimental trend that generated mixed reaction. While earlier seasons had used songs sparingly for special effect, later seasons incorporated musical numbers with increasing regularity. The production values for these musical sequences were generally high, with elaborate choreography, detailed animation, and fully orchestrated songs demonstrating significant resource investment. Episodes like Road to the North Pole from Season 8 featured multiple musical numbers that served both comedic and narrative functions. The songs were often genuinely well crafted as musical compositions, while also containing jokes and advancing plots. However, the frequency of musical content in later seasons led some viewers to feel that songs were becoming a crutch, deployed when writers were uncertain how else to fill episode time or create memorable moments. The musical numbers also required significant production time and resources, with songs needing to be written, arranged, recorded, and animated. The show employed professional composers and arrangers to create these musical sequences, with Walter Murphy serving as the primary composer for many Family Guy songs. The commitment to quality musical production demonstrated that when Family Guy invested in experimental formats, it did so with adequate resources to execute them properly. The parody episodes that devoted entire runtimes to recreating specific movies or stories represented perhaps Family Guy's most ambitious structural experiments. The Star Wars parodies, Blue Harvest, Something 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 Dark Side, and It's a Trap, retold the original Star Wars trilogy with Family Guy characters and humor. These specials required enormous production effort to recreate iconic scenes, dialogue, and visuals, while adding the show's comedic sensibility. The Star Wars specials generated significant discussion about their merits and purpose. Fans of both Family Guy and Star Wars often appreciated the detailed recreation and the ways the specials added new jokes while respecting the source material. However, critics questioned whether essentially retelling existing stories with different character designs represented genuine creativity or was merely an elaborate reference, substituting recognition for original comedy. The specials were financially successful enough to justify their production costs through DVD sales and viewership, though their relationship to Family Guy's core identity remained debatable. The increasing use of shock content and boundary-pushing material represented another form of experimentation, with later seasons testing how far they could go with offensive or disturbing content. Episodes would feature graphic violence, sexual content, or jokes about sensitive subjects that earlier seasons might have approached more carefully or avoided entirely. This experimentation with extremity generated strong reactions, both positive and negative. Some viewers appreciated Family Guy's willingness to push boundaries and make jokes that other shows would not attempt, seeing this as the show maintaining its irreverent identity in an increasingly sensitive cultural environment. These fans argued that comedy should be allowed to offend, and that Family Guy's experimental approach to shocking content kept it feeling dangerous and unpredictable in ways that safer comedy could not achieve. However, other viewers felt that later seasons' shock content crossed lines into being offensive for its own sake, rather than serving comedic purposes. The distinction between pushing boundaries to make points through satire versus simply being provocative to generate attention became increasingly unclear in later experimental episodes. Some shocking content felt calculated to generate controversy in media coverage, rather than emerging organically from comedic vision. The experimental episode formats sometimes included breaking traditional narrative structure entirely. Episodes would abandon conventional plotting for stream-of-consciousness sequences, extended cutaway chains where cutaways led to other cutaways, or deliberately nonsensical storylines that refused coherent resolution. These experiments tested whether Family Guy could function without the basic storytelling framework that even absurdist comedy typically maintains. Viewer mail number 2 inches from Season 10 included a segment deliberately mocking coherent storytelling by presenting a Family Guy episode written by a manatee randomly selecting idea balls, referencing South Park's criticism of Family Guy's writing process. The self-aware mockery of the show's own methods represented meta-humor at its most extreme, with Family Guy essentially agreeing with criticism while also defending its approach as intentionally random and unconcerned with traditional narrative. Quality standards. The audience reactions to these various experiments divided along several lines. Some viewers appreciated any deviation from formula and enjoyed experimental episodes for their novelty and ambition. These fans saw Experimentation as evidence that the show's creative team was still trying to innovate rather than coasting on established success. Even failed experiments were valued for demonstrating creative risk-taking. Other viewers preferred Family Guy's traditional format and felt experimental episodes represented the show losing confidence in its core identity. These fans wanted episodes featuring the Griffin family and Quahog, dealing with recognizable sitcom situations with Family Guy's characteristic humor. Experimental episodes that departed dramatically from this formula felt like different shows that happened to feature Family Guy characters, rather than actual Family Guy episodes. The critical reception of experimental episodes was similarly divided. Critics who had grown tired of Family Guy's standard format sometimes praised experiments as refreshing departures from predictable patterns. However, critics who valued consistency and felt that Family Guy had specific strengths that should be emphasized often viewed experiments as distractions from what the show did well, or as evidence that the creative team had run out of ideas for conventional episodes. The commercial performance of experimental episodes provided some data about audience preferences, though the data was complicated by various factors. Special episodes and anthology formats often drew higher initial viewership due to promotion and novelty appeal. However, this did not necessarily indicate that audiences preferred experimental formats to standard episodes, as special events naturally attract more attention regardless of content quality. The DVD and streaming performance of experimental episodes also showed mixed patterns. Some experimental episodes, like Road to the Multiverse, showed strong repeat viewership and sales, suggesting genuine audience appreciation. Other experimental formats showed less sustained interest, with viewers sampling them once, but not returning repeatedly as they might with favorite conventional episodes. The balance between experimentation and consistency became an ongoing challenge for Family Guy's creative team. Too much consistency risked the show becoming stale and predictable, while too much experimentation risked alienating fans who wanted reliable entertainment matching their expectations of what Family Guy should be. Finding the right balance required understanding what core elements needed to remain constant and what aspects could be modified or abandoned without losing the show's essential identity. The experimentation also reflected the realities of producing hundreds of episodes of a single show. Creative teams need variety and new challenges to maintain enthusiasm and avoid burnout. Experimental episodes provided opportunities for writers, animators, and voice actors to try new approaches and work on projects that felt fresh and different from standard episodes. This creative refreshment could benefit the show overall, even if individual experiments did not fully succeed. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. The series' evolution through experimentation reflects broader trends in how long-running animated shows balance innovation against consistency, a tension particularly visible in contemporary reception and ongoing quality debates. Section 9. Contemporary Reception and Quality Debates. The ongoing conversation about Family Guy's quality in its modern era, particularly from Season 10 onward through the 2010s and into the 2020s, reveals a complex and divided fan base grappling with how to assess a show that has been on the air for over 2 decades. Unlike shows that ended at a clear stopping point, Family Guy continues producing new episodes, creating an evolving target for quality assessment. The debates about contemporary Family Guy reflect not just differing opinions about individual episodes or seasons, but fundamental disagreements about what the show should be, what standards it should be held to, and how long-running television comedies should be evaluated. The modern Family Guy viewership represents multiple distinct audience segments with different relationships to the show. Longtime fans who have watched since the original 1999 run bring expectations shaped by early seasons and peak-era episodes. These viewers often approach new episodes through the lens of nostalgia and comparison, measuring contemporary Family Guy against their memories of what the show once was. This perspective naturally makes new episodes vulnerable to unfavorable comparisons as they compete against idealized recollections of earlier seasons. Another segment consists of viewers who discovered Family Guy through syndication, streaming platforms, or later seasons. These fans may have watched episodes out of order, consuming entire seasons rapidly rather than experiencing the show week by week over years. Their relationship with the show is less about tracking evolution over time and more about the overall body of work as an accessible comedy library. For these viewers, debates about golden ages and decline may feel less relevant because their experience of the show was never chronological or tied to specific broadcast periods. Younger viewers who came to Family Guy in the 2000s or 2000s represent yet another perspective. These fans encountered the show in its contemporary form, without the baggage of earlier eras. For them, modern Family Guy is simply Family Guy, not a decline from some previous peak. This generation's relationship with the show exists in a different media context, where animated comedies are abundant, and where Family Guy is one option among many, rather than a groundbreaking phenomenon. The critical reception of contemporary Family Guy from professional television critics has generally ranged from negative to indifferent. Most major television critics stopped regularly reviewing Family Guy years ago, treating the show as a known quantity, not requiring ongoing analysis. When critics do write about the show, it is often in the context of broader discussions about long-running television, animated comedy, or cultural commentary, rather than engaging with specific episodes as worthy of individual critical attention. However, the diminished critical attention does not necessarily reflect the show's actual quality, so much as the reality that after hundreds of episodes, critics have said what they have to say about Family Guy. The show's format and approach are well established, and unless episodes represent dramatic departures or generate significant controversy, there is limited motivation for critics to continue covering a show whose basic identity has been analyzed extensively over decades. Online fan communities continue to actively discuss contemporary Family Guy episodes, with platforms like Reddit, Twitter, and dedicated Family Guy forums hosting ongoing conversations about new episodes, season quality, and comparisons to earlier eras. These communities show the divided nature of current reception, with threads about new episodes typically featuring both defenders who enjoy what the show continues to provide, and critics who express disappointment or frustration with perceived quality decline. The Reddit community dedicated to Family Guy demonstrates this split clearly. Episode discussion threads for new episodes typically include comments praising specific jokes or moments, alongside comments criticizing the episode as unfunny or inferior to earlier seasons. The voting patterns on these comments vary, suggesting that neither perspective represents a clear majority consensus. This reflects a fanbase where multiple viewpoints coexist without resolution. Some contemporary defenders of Family Guy argue that the show still produces genuinely funny episodes, and that critics are applying unfairly high standards or allowing nostalgia to cloud their judgment. These fans point to specific recent episodes they found hilarious, noting that the show's hit rate for jokes may not be perfect, yet it remains higher than most alternatives on television. This perspective holds that Family Guy is being judged against an impossible ideal of its own peak, rather than against actual competition. The argument from defenders often includes the observation that comedy is subjective, and that what one viewer finds funny, another might find tedious or offensive. They note that Family Guy has always divided audiences, and that contemporary criticism echoes criticisms that were made about early seasons. From this view, the show has not changed as much as some critics claim, and the perception of decline reflects changed audience expectations more than changed show quality. Contemporary critics of Family Guy counter that while comedy is subjective, patterns in joke construction, character consistency, satirical sharpness, and creative ambition can be analyzed relatively objectively. They argue that later seasons show measurable declines in these areas compared to peak seasons, and that defending contemporary Family Guy requires ignoring these observable changes. The criticism maintains that nostalgia is not the only or even primary factor in preferring earlier seasons. The ratings data for contemporary Family Guy provides some objective measure of audience response, though interpreting this data requires context. The show's viewership has declined from its peak in the late 2000s. Yet this decline must be understood within the broader context of declining traditional television viewership across all programming. Comparing Family Guy's current ratings to its peak era ratings without accounting for industry-wide changes would be misleading. Within the current television landscape, Family Guy continues to perform adequately for Fox, drawing enough viewers to justify renewal and generating revenue through advertising, syndication, and streaming deals. The show remains part of Fox's Sunday night animation block and continues to be treated as valuable programming, even if it no longer generates the cultural buzz or massive audiences it once commanded. The streaming availability of all Family Guy episodes on platforms like Hulu has changed how audiences engage with the show. Viewers can now watch any episode from any season at any time, creating opportunities for direct comparison between different eras. This accessibility makes it easier for fans to revisit classic episodes and measure contemporary episodes against them, potentially reinforcing perceptions of quality decline when watching a new episode after marathoning peak-era seasons. The social media response to new Family Guy episodes shows patterns distinct from earlier forms of audience response. Twitter reactions to new episodes are immediate and public,
creating real-time collective viewing experiences. Trending topics and hashtags around new episodes can amplify both positive and negative reactions, creating impressions of consensus that may not reflect actual audience distribution. A relatively small number of vocal critics or defenders can dominate social media conversation in ways that overstate their representativeness. The meme culture surrounding Family Guy also affects contemporary reception. Certain scenes, quotes, or moments from the show circulate widely as memes, often divorced from their original episode context. These memes typically come from earlier seasons, reinforcing those seasons' cultural presence, while contemporary episodes generate less meme-worthy content. This pattern creates a feedback loop where earlier seasons maintain visibility and relevance, while newer seasons fade from cultural conversation more quickly. The relationship between Family Guy and other adult animated comedies in the contemporary landscape also influences reception. When Family Guy premiered, it was one of few adult animated sitcoms alongside The Simpsons and South Park. The current landscape includes numerous animated comedies like Bob's Burgers, Rick and Morty, Archer, and others, creating a competitive environment where Family Guy is one option among many. Viewers can compare Family Guy not just to its own earlier seasons, but to entirely different shows with different approaches to animated comedy. Some contemporary discussions suggest that Family Guy's approach to comedy feels dated compared to newer animated shows that have learned from its innovations while developing their own identities. Rick and Morty's combination of science fiction concepts with dark humor, Bob's Burgers' character-driven wholesome comedy, and other shows' distinct voices create contexts where Family Guy's cutaway-heavy randomness feels like an older model of animated comedy rather than the cutting edge it once represented. However, other perspectives note that Family Guy's longevity and continued production represent achievements worthy of respect, even if contemporary episodes do not match peak quality. Maintaining any creative endeavor for over 20 years is difficult, and that Family Guy continues to exist and employ hundreds of people in animation, writing, and voice acting is itself valuable. This view holds that criticizing the show for not being what it was at its peak misses the point that long-running shows serve different functions than they did during their initial cultural impact. The contemporary Family Guy also exists in a changed cultural and political environment from its early years. Sensitivities around representation, offensive humor, and social responsibility have shifted significantly between 1999 and the 2020s. The show's willingness to make jokes about any subject, regardless of offense, was once seen as transgressive and brave, whereas contemporary contexts sometimes view the same approach as punching down or perpetuating harmful stereotypes. This changed environment affects reception regardless of actual episode quality. Some episodes from recent seasons have generated specific controversies that exemplify changed cultural contexts. Content that might have passed with minimal comment in earlier eras now generates think pieces, social media campaigns, and calls for the show to be more responsible or sensitive. Whether these responses represent legitimate evolution in social values or excessive sensitivity depends on viewer perspective. Yet the changed environment undeniably affects how contemporary Family Guy is received and discussed. The question of whether Family Guy should change to accommodate contemporary values or remain true to its original irreverent approach divides both creators and audiences. Some argue that comedy must evolve with cultural understanding, and that insisting on the right to offend, regardless of context, is stubborn adherence to outdated approaches. Others maintain that comedy loses its edge when constrained by sensitivity concerns, and that Family Guy should continue making jokes as it always has, regardless of contemporary criticism. The production team's own perspectives on contemporary Family Guy are difficult to assess from outside the process, as creators rarely acknowledge quality decline in their own work. Seth MacFarlane has stepped back from day-to-day involvement with Family Guy to focus on other projects, though he continues voicing Peter, Brian, Stewie, and other characters. His reduced involvement might contribute to changes in the show's voice and priorities, though the extent of his current creative input versus earlier seasons is not publicly detailed. The writing staff turnover over 20-plus years means that contemporary Family Guy is written by substantially different people than early seasons. New writers bring different perspectives, references, and comedy sensibilities that inevitably shift the show's character. Whether these shifts represent decline or simply evolution depends partly on whether viewers value consistency or freshness more highly in long-running shows. The animation production has also evolved significantly, with contemporary Family Guy using digital animation techniques throughout its production pipeline. The visual polish of modern episodes is undeniable,
with smooth character movements, detailed backgrounds, and technical proficiency that early seasons could not match. However, some fans missed the slightly rougher aesthetic of earlier seasons, feeling that increased visual refinement has made the show look more generic and less distinctive. The voice performances in contemporary episodes remain professionally executed, with the core cast continuing to voice their characters competently. However, some fans detect a routine quality to performances, with actors delivering lines efficiently without the energy or commitment that characterized earlier seasons. Whether this reflects actual performance changes or is projection from viewers who have become overly familiar with the characters' voices is difficult to determine objectively. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Reception patterns directly affect how Family Guy fits within contemporary adult animation, where the show's legacy and current output exist in complicated relationship with each other and with newer competitors. Section 10. Comparing Golden Age to later seasons. Comparing Family Guy's golden age to its later seasons requires examining specific elements that fans and critics identify as having changed, understanding what made peak-era episodes distinctive, and recognizing how later seasons evolved these elements in ways that many viewers found less satisfying. This comparison is not simply about subjective preference for older episodes due to nostalgia, though nostalgia certainly plays a role in how earlier seasons are remembered. Rather, it involves identifying concrete differences in writing approach, comedic technique, character usage, and overall execution that distinguish the commonly identified Golden Age from subsequent periods. The writing style in Golden Age Family Guy, generally agreed to span from the revival in Season 4 through Season 7 or 8, demonstrated a particular balance between different comedy types. Episodes from this period mixed cutaway gags with character-driven comedy, satirical commentary with absurdist premises, and crude humor with occasional emotional depth. The density of jokes was high, creating the rapid-fire pace the show became known for. Yet the jokes felt purposeful rather than random, serving narratives or character moments even when wildly tangential to main plots. In contrast, later seasons from approximately Season 10 onward showed shifts in this balance. The cutaway gag density remained high or even increased, yet the cutaways increasingly felt formulaic or interchangeable. The character-driven comedy decreased as characters became more extreme caricatures, less capable of generating humor from recognizable human behavior or relationships. The satirical edge dulled as the show relied more on pop culture references than on commentary about those references. These shifts created episodes that structurally resembled earlier Family Guy, while feeling qualitatively different in execution. Specific examples illustrate these differences clearly. The Season 5 episode, Road to Rupert, featured Stewie and Brian traveling to Aspen to retrieve Stewie's teddy bear. The episode balanced the adventure narrative with character development, showing Stewie's attachment to Rupert and Brian's friendship with Stewie. The cutaway gags in the episode served the story or provided commentary on the situations characters faced. The whole episode felt coherent, even while incorporating Family Guy's characteristic randomness. Compare this to a later season episode with similar structure. While the later episode might include comparable numbers of jokes and cutaways, the balance often shifted toward cutaways that existed purely for quick laughs without connecting to character or story. The adventure narrative would unfold more mechanically, hitting expected beats without the character development that gave earlier episodes emotional anchoring. The result looked like Family Guy in structure, while missing elements that made Golden Age episodes satisfying beyond just joke delivery. The pacing of Golden Age episodes also differed from later seasons in subtle yet important ways. Peak-era Family Guy episodes generally maintained narrative momentum even when interrupted by frequent cutaways. The main storyline advanced consistently, with cutaways feeling like detours that enhanced rather than derailed the episode's progression. Later seasons sometimes felt like cutaways with minimal story connecting them, or alternatively like stories that stopped cold for cutaway sequences before resuming without smooth transitions. The rhythm within individual episodes from the Golden Age showed careful construction where jokes built on each other and callbacks within episodes created layered comedy. A joke early in an episode might be referenced or expanded later, creating satisfying payoffs for attentive viewers. Later seasons sometimes abandon this internal structure, with jokes existing independently rather than building cumulative comedic momentum across the episode's runtime. The comedic risk-taking that characterized Golden Age Family Guy took specific forms that distinguished it from both earlier and later seasons. The show was willing to build elaborate set pieces, invest in extended parodies or homages, and commit to high-concept premises that required entire episodes to explore fully. This ambition was matched by execution quality that justified the resource investment. Later seasons continued attempting ambitious episodes, yet the execution sometimes felt less sharp or the concepts less fully developed. The character voice writing in Golden Age episodes showed characters who were consistent enough to feel recognizable, while still capable of development or surprise. Peter could be both bumbling fool and devoted father within the same episode without the characterizations feeling contradictory. Brian could be both intellectual snob and loyal friend. Stewie could be both diabolical genius and vulnerable child. Later seasons flanderized versions of these characters lost this dimensionality, making them less versatile for storytelling. The dialogue writing in Golden Age seasons showed characters speaking in distinct voices that reflected their personalities while also serving comedic purposes. Peter's dialogue sounded different from Brian's, which sounded different from Stewie's, creating verbal variety that enhanced characterization. Later seasons maintained these vocal distinctions in performance, yet the actual dialogue sometimes felt less carefully differentiated, with characters becoming vehicles for jokes rather than distinct personalities with unique speech patterns. The pop culture reference strategy in Golden Age Family Guy involved transforming references rather than simply making them. When the show parodied a movie or referenced a cultural phenomenon during the peak period, it added Family Guy's perspective, or twisted the reference in ways that created new comedy beyond just recognition. Later seasons increasingly deployed references as endpoints rather than starting points, assuming that mentioning something was itself funny without requiring additional comedic work. The range of pop culture referenced also evolved over the show's run. Golden Age episodes drew from diverse sources including classic films, television history, literature, and contemporary culture, creating reference pools that rewarded different types of knowledge. Later seasons sometimes narrowed their reference range or relied more heavily on very recent pop culture, making episodes more immediately topical while potentially dating them more quickly. The satirical targets in Golden Age episodes were often specific and clearly identified. Whether mocking FCC censorship in PTV, satirizing pharmaceutical companies, or commenting on American political culture, the show had recognizable perspectives, even when wrapped in absurdist presentation. Later season satire became less focused, sometimes making jokes about political or cultural topics without clear viewpoints beyond vague cynicism or both sides' dismissal. The political satire specifically showed evolution across eras. Golden Age Family Guy generally leaned liberal in perspective while maintaining willingness to mock liberal positions and figures alongside conservative ones. This balance created satire that felt multi-directional and genuinely irreverent. Later seasons sometimes struggled to maintain this balance, with political content feeling either more partisan or more nihilistically dismissive of all political engagement. The emotional beats in Golden Age episodes, while never the primary focus, were earned through character development and narrative setup. When an episode ended with a genuine family moment or character growth, the audience had been given reason to care about that resolution through the preceding story. Later seasons' attempts at emotion sometimes felt perfunctory or even ironic, as if the show was embarrassed by sincerity and needed to undercut any genuine feeling with additional jokes. The relationship between comedy and emotion in Golden Age episodes allowed for occasional moments where comedy paused to let genuine feeling register. These moments were rare enough to feel special and were integrated smoothly enough that they did not disrupt the overall comedic tone. Later seasons either avoided these moments entirely or executed them with less grace, creating tonal whiplash between cynical comedy and sudden sentiment. The visual comedy in Golden Age Family Guy utilized animation creatively to enhance jokes that could not be achieved through dialogue alone. Sight gags, visual references, and animated set pieces demonstrated that the creative team understood animation as a unique medium with specific opportunities for comedy. Later seasons remained technically proficient in animation, yet often used it less creatively, relying more on dialogue-driven humor than on visual invention. The animation direction in Golden Age episodes showed attention to comedic timing and visual execution, with movements, expressions, and visual gags carefully timed to maximize impact. Later seasons' technically superior animation sometimes felt less purposeful in its comedic timing, with smoother movements that paradoxically felt less funny because they lacked the deliberate awkwardness or exaggeration that enhanced earlier visual comedy. The guest star usage in Golden Age episodes typically integrated celebrity voices into storylines organically, with guests playing characters that served narratives rather than appearing just for the sake of celebrity cachet. Later seasons continued featuring prominent guests, yet their appearances sometimes felt more like celebrity cameos than integrated performances,
drawing attention to the guest rather than enhancing the episode.
The frequency of guest appearances also increased in later seasons, with multiple celebrities appearing in single episodes where Golden Age episodes might have featured one major guest or none. This increased frequency potentially diluted the impact of any individual guest appearance, while also suggesting the show was relying on celebrity draws to maintain viewer interest. The musical elements during the Golden Age were deployed strategically, with songs appearing when they could enhance comedy or advance stories in ways that dialogue could not. The songs were generally well-crafted and memorable, with many becoming associated with Family Guy in popular culture. Later seasons increased use of musical numbers, while maintaining production quality, sometimes felt like formula rather than special moments, reducing their impact through overuse. The variety of musical styles in Golden Age episodes showed creative range, with the show attempting everything from Broadway-style production numbers to parodies of specific artists to original comedic songs. Later seasons maintained this variety, yet the songs sometimes felt more generic or less specifically tailored to the episodes they appeared in, serving as musical interludes rather than integral components of storytelling. The callback and continuity usage in Golden Age Family Guy created rewards for regular viewers without alienating casual audiences. References to previous episodes or running gags acknowledged the show's history while remaining accessible to viewers who had not seen every episode. Later seasons sometimes relied more heavily on continuity and callbacks in ways that privileged longtime viewers while potentially confusing newcomers. The episode structure in Golden Age seasons generally followed recognizable narrative arcs, even when incorporating absurdist elements or frequent cutaways. Stories had beginnings, middles, and ends that felt complete, even when plots were deliberately ridiculous. Later seasons sometimes abandoned coherent structure entirely, creating episodes that felt fragmented or unresolved, as if the writers were less concerned with narrative satisfaction than with delivering individual jokes. The voice acting energy in Golden Age episodes is difficult to quantify objectively. Yet many fans report perceiving higher enthusiasm and commitment from voice actors during peak seasons. Whether this reflects actual performance differences or is influenced by other factors like writing quality that make performances seem more engaged is uncertain. Yet the perception contributes to how episodes from different eras are experienced. The cultural relevance and impact of Golden Age Family Guy extended beyond the show itself, with episodes generating memes, quotable moments, and cultural discussions that spread through popular culture. Later seasons continue producing content, yet individual episodes rarely achieve the same cultural penetration or lasting impact. This could reflect changed media environments as much as changed show quality, as the fragmented contemporary media landscape makes achieving cultural saturation more difficult for any television content. The fan rankings and retrospective assessments consistently place Golden Age seasons higher than later seasons when fans are asked to order seasons by quality or preference. These rankings appear across different platforms and fan communities with remarkable consistency, suggesting genuine consensus among segments of the fan base rather than just vocal minority opinion. Seasons 4 through 7 typically appear in or near the top tier of these rankings, while season 10 and later seasons appear significantly lower. The rewatchability factor distinguishes Golden Age episodes from later seasons for many fans. Peak era episodes are reportedly rewatched more frequently, shared more widely, and discussed more enthusiastically than later episodes. Whether this pattern reflects superior quality or simply the familiarity and comfort of known quantities is debatable, yet it demonstrates behavioral differences in how fans engage with different eras of the show. The critical consensus among both professional critics and fan critics shows agreement that Family Guy's Golden Age represented a peak that later seasons have not recaptured. While some critics defend later seasons or argue the decline is overstated, the preponderance of critical opinion views the peak period as qualitatively superior to what followed. This consensus is notable because it crosses different viewer segments and critical approaches. The production context differences between Golden Age and later seasons also merit consideration. Peak-era Family Guy was produced by a team energized by the show's cancellation and revival, working to prove the revival was justified and that the show had creative vitality. Later seasons are produced in a context of established success and assured renewal, potentially reducing the creative urgency that can drive exceptional work. The creative team composition shifted significantly between Golden Age and later seasons, as writers, directors, and other key personnel moved to different projects or left the show entirely. These personnel changes inevitably affected the show's voice and sensibility, as different creators bring different strengths, weaknesses, and comedic perspectives. While some continuity remained through long-term staff, including Seth MacFarlane's continued voice work, the cumulative effect of changing creative personnel contributed to the show's evolution.
Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. This comparison helps define what Family Guy's golden age felt like to audiences, establishing the specific qualities that made those years feel special, and explaining why they remain the reference point for evaluating the show's current output. Section 11. Why the golden age perception matters. The concept of a golden age for Family Guy represents more than just nostalgic preference for earlier seasons or simple disagreement about comedy quality. Understanding why fans and critics identify a specific period as the show's peak reveals important insights about how humor evolves, how cultural context shapes reception, and how audience expectations change over time. The golden age perception matters because it reflects genuine patterns in how television comedy works, how long-running shows relate to their audiences, and how creative output is assessed across extended periods. Examining why this perception exists and what it means provides valuable perspective on Family Guy specifically, and on serialized animation more broadly. The emotional connection many fans feel toward Family Guy's early and peak seasons stems from the specific life circumstances in which they first encountered the show. For viewers who discovered Family Guy during high school or college years, the show became associated with formative experiences, social bonding with friends, and the particular sensibility of that life stage. The humor that worked for them at ages 15 to 25 may not resonate the same way at 35 or 45, yet the earlier episodes remain tied to powerful memories and emotions from important developmental periods. This emotional anchoring means that Golden Age episodes are remembered not just as television content, but as part of personal history. When longtime fans watch Season 5 episodes, they're not just watching comedy from 2006 and 2007. They are accessing memories of where they were in life when those episodes aired, who they watched with, what they were dealing with personally, and how the show fit into their daily routines and social lives. This emotional dimension makes it difficult to separate objective assessment of episode quality from subjective response shaped by personal history. The power of these associations extends beyond individual viewing experiences to encompass broader cultural moments. Fans remember not just the episodes themselves, but the conversations they had about them, the quotes they shared, the way certain episodes became reference points in their social circles. This social embedding of Golden Age episodes in personal and communal memory creates layers of meaning that newer episodes, even if equally well crafted, cannot replicate because they lack the same historical and emotional weight. However, dismissing Golden Age perception as purely nostalgic overlooks the fact that the identified peak period shows consistency across different viewer demographics and different points of entry to the show. Fans who discovered Family Guy through different means and at different times still tend to identify similar seasons as peak quality, suggesting that something beyond personal nostalgia contributes to the consensus. The convergence of opinion across varied fan experiences points to qualities in the content itself, rather than just individual viewer circumstances. The cross-generational consistency in identifying seasons 4 through 7 as the peak suggests that these seasons possess objectively identifiable superior qualities. Different fans with different life experiences and different cultural contexts arrive at similar conclusions about which episodes and seasons represent Family Guy at its best. This convergence indicates that while nostalgia plays a role in Golden Age perception, it does not fully explain the pattern. The Golden Age concept also reflects how comedy ages, and how comedic references and styles can become dated or feel less fresh over time. Family Guy's early seasons felt groundbreaking, partly because the cutaway gag structure and rapid-fire reference style were relatively novel in animated sitcoms. As this approach became established and was copied by other shows, it lost some of its freshness. The perception of a golden age partly reflects the reality that innovative comedy stops feeling innovative once it becomes familiar or widely imitated. The cultural context in which Family Guy existed during its peak years also contributed to how the show was received and remembered. The mid to late 2000s represented a specific moment in American culture, television landscape, and political environment
that shaped what comedy resonated and how boundary-pushing content was received. The show that felt perfectly calibrated to that moment might naturally feel less perfectly aligned with different cultural contexts in later years. The political climate during the Golden Age years, spanning the later Bush administration and the beginning of the Obama presidency, created a specific context for Family Guy's satire and social commentary. The show's liberal-leaning yet omnidirectionally mocking approach resonated with audiences during this period in ways that might play differently in changed political environments. Understanding Golden Age Family Guy requires understanding the cultural moment it was produced for and responded to. The media consumption patterns during Family Guy's peak also differed from contemporary viewing habits in ways that affected how episodes were experienced. During the Golden Age, viewers typically watched episodes once per week as they aired, creating anticipation between episodes and allowing time for episodes to be discussed and absorbed before the next one arrived. This pacing created different engagement than binge-watching entire seasons rapidly, or streaming episodes on demand whenever desired. The weekly broadcast schedule also meant that each episode was an event that viewers prepared for and discussed afterwards with friends, co-workers, or online communities. This social dimension of watching Family Guy during its peak created shared cultural experiences where many people watched the same episode at the same time and then discussed it together. Contemporary fragmented viewing, where people watch on different schedules and platforms, creates less opportunity for this collective experience. The appointment television aspect of Golden Age Family Guy viewing created ritualistic behavior around the show that enhanced its place in viewers' lives. Sunday nights at 9 p.m. became Family Guy time for many fans, creating routine and anticipation that made the show more than just content to consume, but an event to participate in. This ritualistic viewing created stronger bonds between show and audience than on-demand streaming typically allows. The relationship between Family Guy and its audience during the Golden Age involved a sense that the show was still proving itself and earning its audience's loyalty. After the cancellation and revival, the show maintained some of the underdog quality that made fans feel invested in its success. This dynamic created a partnership feeling, where fans supported the show, and the show rewarded that support with quality content. Later seasons, produced from a position of established success and guaranteed renewal, lost this dynamic and the creative energy it generated. The conversations about Family Guy's Golden Age also reveal how fans engage with long-running franchises, and how they construct narratives about creative rises and falls. The human tendency to organize experiences into stories with beginnings, middles, and ends encourages viewing Family Guy's run as having distinct eras with peaks and valleys. This narrative framework helps make sense of hundreds of episodes across 20-plus years by dividing them into meaningful periods rather than treating them as undifferentiated content. The narrative structure fans impose on Family Guy's history serves psychological needs for order and meaning. Rather than confronting the overwhelming complexity of assessing hundreds of individual episodes, the Golden Age framework simplifies the task into identifying a peak period and then comparing other periods to that standard. This simplification makes the show's history more manageable and discussable. The Golden Age discourse serves functions for fan communities beyond just assessing quality. Debates about when the peak occurred and what characterized it create opportunities for fans to demonstrate knowledge, argue positions, share memories, and bond over common references. These conversations build community and create shared language and touchstones that unite fans even when they disagree about specifics. The Golden Age concept becomes a tool for community building as much as quality assessment. The existence of a perceived Golden Age also creates standards against which contemporary episodes can be measured, providing benchmarks for discussing what works or does not work in current Family Guy. Rather than evaluating each new episode in isolation, fans can compare it to peak-era episodes to articulate specific ways it succeeds or fails. This comparative framework makes criticism more specific and constructive than simply stating that something is not funny. The Golden Age perception also matters for understanding how creative longevity works in television and what challenges face any show attempting to maintain quality across decades. Family Guy's arc from innovative newcomer to established institution to potentially declining legacy show represents a pattern many long-running series follow. Examining Family Guy's trajectory provides lessons about creative sustainability, audience expectations, and the difficulties of maintaining freshness across hundreds of episodes. The pressure of living up to a perceived Golden Age affects the creative team producing contemporary Family Guy, whether they acknowledge it explicitly or not. Writers and producers know that new episodes will be compared to peak-era classics and judged against high standards. This awareness could inspire efforts to recapture past glory, or it could create pressure that inhibits creativity and encourages playing it safe,
rather than taking risks that might fail compared to beloved earlier work. The Golden Age concept also shapes how Family Guy is marketed and presented to new potential viewers. Streaming platforms and DVD releases highlight popular episodes and seasons, typically favoring Golden Age content in their recommendations and featured collections. This marketing approach reinforces the perception that certain seasons represent the definitive Family Guy experience, while implicitly acknowledging that later seasons may be less essential. The cultural studies and media analysis perspectives on Golden Ages recognize them as constructed narratives that serve ideological and social functions rather than objective truths about quality. From this view, identifying a Family Guy Golden Age represents fans creating a usable past that validates their current positions about comedy, television, or culture. The Golden Age becomes less about the actual shows and more about what those shows represent to people constructing narratives about cultural change. However, this theoretical perspective does not invalidate the genuine patterns that fans identify when pointing to specific seasons as superior. The fact that Golden Age perception involves constructed narrative does not mean it lacks factual basis in observable differences between seasons. Both things can be true simultaneously. Golden Ages are constructed narratives, and they reflect real patterns in creative output and quality. The generational aspect of Golden Age perception also matters for understanding how different age cohorts relate to the same show. Older fans who watch from the beginning versus younger fans who discovered the show later inevitably have different reference points and different associations with various seasons. What feels like the definitive Family Guy experience varies based on when you started watching and what life stage you occupied during your most intense engagement with the show. The Golden Age discourse also connects to broader conversations about whether comedy shows should end while they are still good, or continue indefinitely, regardless of quality concerns. Family Guy's continued production, despite widespread perception of decline from its peak, raises questions about priorities in television production. Should shows prioritize artistic integrity and go out on high notes, or should they continue as long as they remain commercially viable and provide employment for creative teams? The answer to this question depends on whose perspective you privilege. From a business standpoint, continuing Family Guy makes sense as long as it generates profit and maintains adequate viewership. From a fan perspective focused on artistic legacy, ending the show after its peak would preserve its reputation and prevent accumulation of lesser episodes that dilute overall quality. From the perspective of people employed by the show, continuation provides livelihoods and creative opportunities regardless of critical reception. The Golden Age perception also influences how Family Guy will be remembered historically once the show eventually ends. The seasons identified as peak will likely dominate retrospectives, best-of compilations, and cultural memory of what Family Guy was. Later seasons may be forgotten or dismissed, with the show's legacy primarily resting on its innovations and peak-era content. This pattern is common for long-running shows, where cultural memory compresses the entire run into its highlight periods. The educational value of studying Family Guy's Golden Age and perceived decline lies in what it teaches about comedy construction, audience relationship management, and creative sustainability. Future shows and creators can learn from Family Guy's trajectory about what sustains quality over time, how to handle success, when experimentation helps versus hurts, and how to maintain creative energy across extended runs. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. This leads to a broader reflection on what Family Guy's complete arc teaches us about comedy evolution, creative longevity, and the complex relationships between shows and their audiences across time. Section 12. What we learn from Family Guy's arc. Family Guy's complete journey from 1999 premiere through cancellation, revival, peak success, and perceived decline provides a comprehensive case study in how adult animated comedy evolves, how audiences respond to long-running shows, and what factors contribute to creative sustainability over extended periods. The commonly cited Golden Age, spanning roughly from Season 4 through Season 7 or 8, represents a specific period when multiple factors aligned to produce what many consider the show's best work. Understanding this arc in totality reveals important lessons about television comedy, creative processes, and the complex dynamics between shows and their audiences. The early seasons, from 1999 through 2002, established Family Guy's identity and innovative approach to animated comedy.
The cutaway gag structure, rapid-fire humor, willingness to push boundaries, and particular blend of crude and clever comedy distinguished the show from competitors and built a passionate initial fan base. These seasons demonstrated that taking creative risks and doing something genuinely different could succeed even if initial ratings and critical reception were mixed. The lesson here is that distinctive voice and creative confidence can build audience investment even when a show faces early struggles. The willingness to be genuinely different rather than following established formulas proved essential to Family Guy's initial success. The show did not try to be The Simpsons or any other existing property. It developed its own identity through the cutaway gag structure and particular comedy sensibility that felt fresh. This teaches that innovation requires accepting the risk of alienating audiences accustomed to familiar approaches, while trusting that distinctive work will find its audience. The cancellation after season 3 could have ended Family Guy's story. Yet the show's afterlife in syndication and DVD sales demonstrated the value of content beyond initial broadcast. Family Guy succeeded in finding its audience through alternative distribution channels, proving that initial network performance does not tell the whole story of a show's viability or cultural impact. This lesson about long-tail success and multiple revenue streams influenced how networks thought about programming and about giving shows time to find audiences through various platforms. The syndication success demonstrated that shows can build audiences over time through repeated exposure rather than requiring immediate massive viewership. Viewers who missed the original run or dismissed the show based on early episodes discovered it through Adult Swim reruns and became devoted fans. This teaches that content quality can eventually find appreciation even when initial reception is lukewarm, provided alternative distribution allows second chances. The revival in 2005 represented an almost unprecedented second chance that energized the creative team and validated the passionate fan base. The post-revival seasons showed creative teams working with renewed purpose and enthusiasm, producing some of the show's most acclaimed episodes. The lesson from this period is that creative energy often peaks when teams feel they have something to prove, and when success feels earned rather than guaranteed. The hunger that comes from having faced cancellation and fought back to revival can generate exceptional work. The Golden Age period from approximately season 4 through season 7 demonstrated Family Guy achieving the balance between its various elements that produced optimal results. Character-driven comedy mixed with cutaway gags, satire balanced crude humor, emotional moments enhanced rather than contradicted the comedy, and ambitious concepts were executed with appropriate resources and care. This period teaches that success in comedy television comes from balance, rather than emphasizing any single element to the exclusion of others. The peak seasons also showed the value of confidence without complacency. The show was successful enough to secure resources for ambitious episodes like the Road 2 specials and the Star Wars parodies, yet not so comfortable that it stopped trying to innovate or take risks. This sweet spot, where confidence enables ambition, while pressure maintains creative discipline, appears repeatedly in discussions of peak television across different shows and genres. The resource investment in special episodes during the Golden Age demonstrated that networks and studios will support ambitious creative visions when shows have proven their value. The elaborate Road 2 episodes required significant additional budget and production time compared to standard episodes. Yet Fox approved these investments because Family Guy had demonstrated its commercial viability. This teaches that creative success can create opportunities for more ambitious work. The transition period around season 8 showed early signs of patterns that would become more pronounced in later seasons. Mixed critical reception, some exceptional episodes alongside more mediocre ones, and subtle shifts in tone and approach signaled that maintaining peak quality across extended runs is extremely difficult. The lesson is that even successful shows face challenges sustaining their initial creative heights as they accumulate episodes and as creative teams change over time. By season 10 and the years following, the perception of decline became widespread enough to represent general consensus rather than minority opinion. The causes of this perceived decline included character flanderization, increased reliance on formula, decreased satirical sharpness, and loss of balance between comedy types. These patterns teach that long-running shows face specific risks, including character exaggeration, creative fatigue, loss of original creative personnel, and difficulty innovating within established formats. The character flanderization that affected Family Guy demonstrates a common pitfall of long-running character-based shows.
Writers seeking fresh angles on familiar characters can inadvertently exaggerate traits until characters become caricatures. Avoiding this requires conscious effort to maintain character complexity and resist the temptation to simplify characters into their most extreme or easily writable traits. The continued commercial success of Family Guy, despite perceived quality decline, demonstrates the difference between critical or fan assessment and business viability. The show remains profitable and draws adequate viewership to justify continuation, teaching that quality perception and commercial success do not perfectly correlate. A show can decline from its peak while remaining successful enough by business metrics to continue indefinitely. The experimentation that Family Guy attempted in later seasons showed creative teams trying various approaches to maintain freshness and avoid complete stagnation. The Road to Specials, anthology episodes, elaborate parodies, and structural experiments demonstrated willingness to try new things, even when results were mixed. The lesson is that experimentation is necessary for long-running shows, even when not all experiments succeed, as the alternative of pure formula eventually produces audience fatigue. However, the mixed response to many experimental episodes also teaches that innovation alone does not guarantee quality. Experimentation must be matched with execution quality and must serve the show's core strengths rather than distracting from them. The most successful Family Guy experiments, like Road to the Multiverse, worked because they used experimental formats to enhance the show's existing comedic voice, rather than replacing it entirely. The character evolution across Family Guy's run teaches lessons about the challenges of maintaining consistent characterization across hundreds of episodes. The flanderization that affected most major characters demonstrates the difficulty of keeping characters fresh while maintaining their core identities. Writers seek new aspects of characters to explore, which can lead to exaggeration of traits or character changes that distance them from their original conceptions. Balancing consistency with development remains one of television's ongoing challenges. The relationship between Family Guy and its audience evolved significantly across the show's run, teaching lessons about how shows and fan bases interact over time. The intense loyalty and enthusiasm of early and peak-era fans gave way to more critical and divided contemporary audiences, demonstrating that audience relationships change as shows age and as viewer expectations evolve. Maintaining positive audience relationships requires ongoing effort and attention to what fans value about the show. The cultural impact of Family Guy extended beyond its viewership numbers to influence the broader landscape of animated comedy. Shows like American Dad, The Cleveland Show, and various other adult animated comedies borrowed elements of Family Guy's approach, teaching that successful innovation creates ripple effects across the medium. Family Guy's influence on animation style, comedic pacing, and content boundaries shaped what came after it, even as the show itself continued evolving. The critical discourse around Family Guy demonstrates how professional critics and fan critics can diverge in their assessments and priorities. While professional critics largely abandoned regular Family Guy coverage after early seasons, fan communities maintained intense ongoing discussion and analysis. This teaches that fan criticism and professional criticism serve different functions and operate by different standards, with neither necessarily more valid than the other. The nostalgic attachment to Golden Age Family Guy teaches broader lessons about how memory and emotion affect media assessment. The specific life circumstances in which people encountered peak-era episodes shapes how those episodes are remembered and valued. This emotional dimension of media consumption means that objective quality assessment is always complicated by subjective response shaped by personal context and experience. The business lessons from Family Guy's arc include the value of syndication rights, the importance of DVD and streaming revenue, the power of dedicated fan bases, and the extended commercial viability of successful franchises. The show's financial success across multiple platforms and revenue streams justified continued production and demonstrated sustainable business models for animated comedy that influenced industry practices. The creative sustainability lessons include the importance of maintaining core creative personnel, the challenges of staff turnover, the necessity of creative refreshment to avoid burnout, and the difficulty of maintaining quality across extended tenures. Family Guy's evolution demonstrates that even successful shows struggle with these challenges, and that perfect creative sustainability may be impossible across decades of production. The cultural context lessons from Family Guy include how changing social values affect comedy reception, how sensitivities around offensive content evolve, and how comedy that felt transgressive in one era can feel dated or inappropriate in another. The show's willingness to push boundaries played differently in 1999, 2007, and 2020,
teaching that comedy exists in specific cultural moments that shape how it is received and interpreted. The legacy lessons involve how long-running shows will be remembered and how later seasons affect overall reputation. Family Guy's legacy will likely rest primarily on its innovations, its peak-era episodes, and its influence on animated comedy, rather than on its complete body of work. This teaches that accumulating large numbers of episodes does not necessarily enhance legacy if later episodes are perceived as inferior to earlier work. The practical lessons for creators include the value of distinctive voice, the importance of balancing different comedy elements, the necessity of creative confidence matched with execution quality, the challenges of maintaining freshness across extended runs, and the reality that even successful shows face decline from peak performance. These lessons apply beyond Family Guy to understanding television comedy more broadly. The audience expectation lessons include how familiarity breeds both affection and potential contempt, how audiences develop sophisticated critical frameworks for assessing shows they follow across years, and how nostalgia and personal history complicate quality assessment. Understanding these factors helps creators and critics appreciate the complex relationships between shows and audiences. The comparative lessons involve how Family Guy's arc compares to other long-running animated comedies. The Simpsons faced similar decline narratives despite maintaining cultural presence. South Park evolved its approach significantly while maintaining quality in many viewers' estimation. Bob's Burgers and newer shows benefit from observing these predecessors' patterns. Each show's trajectory teaches different lessons about creative sustainability and audience management. Family Guy's influence remains significant, regardless of debates about when its golden age ended. The show's innovations in animated comedy structure, its cultural impact during peak years, and its continued presence in the television landscape make it an important case study. The commonly cited peak years of seasons 4 through 7 represent a specific creative accomplishment that stands independent of what came before or after. Understanding Family Guy's complete arc, from innovative newcomer through peak success to perceived decline, provides insights valuable for anyone interested in television comedy, creative processes, or media analysis. The patterns observed in Family Guy's evolution appear across other long-running shows, suggesting general principles about how serialized comedy works and how creative output changes across extended periods. The story told by Family Guy's perceived peak and decline is ultimately about the realities of creative work across time, the challenges of sustaining excellence, and the complex relationships between creators, content, and audiences. These lessons extend beyond a single animated sitcom to illuminate broader truths about art, commerce, and the human need for stories that make us laugh. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.